Hello everyone, welcome to What If Hollow Knight Took Over Little Nightmares Part 2. Before we start, please go support Alanmash for writing that awesome fanfic. This is the translated version I made, there will be some mistaken characters' gender. Phase 2. Secrets of the Troop. This phase takes place around the same time as Signals of Infection. This time, we follow the runaway kid 7 and the Grimchild. 7 stumbles upon the nightmare lantern and upon lighting it, he finds his was to Dirtmouth. He is then tasked by the troopmaster Grimm to partake in a ritual for the Grimchild. He must find flames and feed them to the child and come back once it is full. But as 7 wanders deep into Helenist, he finds out many secrets that were hidden about Helenist and the Grimm troop itself. What will he do with this knowledge? Only he can choose. PH2CH1. The Cliffs. 7 woke up, gasping for air. He quickly checked all over his chest and neck to make sure there were no bite marks. Suddenly, he noticed his body was no longer a gnome. How was that possible? 7 concentrated his mind, trying to remember what happened. The last thing he remembered was getting caught by the lady and getting turned into a gnome. He made his way to the guests' quarters in the mall and then came to an open room. He met a girl wearing a yellow raincoat who looked like she was going to die from starvation. 7 realized there was a sausage in front of him, so he picked it up and offered it to the girl. But instead of eating the sausage, she ate him. 7 gasped as he was brought back to reality. He looked at himself once more. How was he alive? How was he a boy again? Questions for later. He stood up and looked around where he was. He noticed he was on a large cliff towering above the earth beneath him. He noticed the buzzing lights ahead and figured civilization mustn't be too far from here. He climbed down the cliff and noticed a few large bugs. Curious, he approached them, only to hear them screech and then violently start attacking him. 7 ran away, swatting at the large bug, but they tripped and fell down far onto a ledge. He stood up and wiped the rubble away from his face. He opened his eyes and saw a series of scattered pages. He followed them and as he walked he heard someone humming. 7 walked towards the humming noise and found a large bug, slightly taller than him, sketching on a piece of paper with a quill. Excuse me? 7 asked, trying to get the bug's attention. The bug turned and looked at him. Ah, hello little one, he said. Why are you in a desolate place like this? I honestly don't know. Me neither, the bug said. But that is why I am here. To understand. That is why I map these areas out. To understand where I'm going and where I'll be headed. You make maps? 7 asked. Yes, I do, the bug said. Then, do you know where we are? Of course. These are the Howling Cliffs. The entrance to the Grand Kingdom of Helenist, the bug said, cheerfully. If you are looking for shelter, then there's a town on the other side of the cliffs. Me and my wife Iselda moved there. Quite peaceful. Oh, okay, 7 said. That reminds me, I haven't introduced myself, the bug said. I am Cornifer. What's your name? I'm 7. Ah, an interesting name, Cornifer replied. If you're feeling lost, would you like to buy a map? I don't have any money, 7 replied. Well, once you have some, you can buy a few maps at my wife's shop. Okay, I'll keep that in mind, 7 said. Nice talking with you. 7 walked off and began climbing the cliff towards Dirtmouth. Suddenly, a small, spiky bug crawled up and bit his fingers. 7 fell further down the cliffside. He fell on his back and found himself on another ledge. He needed to find a simpler way up. He walked up to a wall and leaned against it to recover. Suddenly, the wall crumbled. There was something behind it. Curious to where it would lead, 7 slammed into the wall with all his might, breaking it. A small cavern was revealed and 7 walked inside. It was fairly dark inside. He needed to find a light source of some kind. Otherwise he would have seen the drop coming. He fell through a hole in the ground into another cave. Are you kidding me? 7 yelled, angry at the fact he kept falling. He tried to climb back up the wall, but he fell through the wall, revealing another secret passage. 7 felt the urge to explore it, see what was inside. It was bitterly cold inside and darker than the other. But 7's curiosity overpowered him and convinced him to venture further. He arrived at the end of the cave where there was a corpse of a large bug. It wore a red cloak and it had a mask with 2 lines stitched across the eye holes. He noticed something shiny on the floor. He picked it up and saw it was some kind of compass. The cold was getting to him now, so 7 decided to take a piece of the bug's cloak. It didn't need it. After all, it was dead. Once he put it on however, something strange happened. A burst of red dream catcher particles flew out and surrounded the area. 7 was curious, but he needed to get out first. Once he moved into the next room however, something was different. There was a large towering structure. It looked like a clawed, 4-fingered hand, but at the bottom, there was a cage bearing a few coals. Thinking he could use them for warmth, 7 took 2 rocks on the floor and struck them together. A spark came out and fell onto the embers. They lit for a while, but it was not enough. 7 cracked the rocks against the cage a few more times, and suddenly the fire lit and the structure above burst out with a red fire burning brightly on top. The surrounding torch lit and the cave began to shake. 7 heard a weird type of carnival music play as the flames burned strongly, their red flames reaching out into the cave. "Master, I need to speak with you." "Not now, Brum, I'm trying to figure things out." The night disappeared, the Grimchild has been drained of its flame, my kin have all left, and we're now back in the nightmare realm. "About that, Master, the lantern. It's been relighted." "Has it?" "Yes, in Helenist. Someone lit the lantern." "Well then, what are you waiting for, Brum? Alert the steeds. Inform Divine. We're going back to Dirtmouth." "Yes, Master. I will do so at once." Brum walks away. I wonder, how good will this new bearer be? PH2CH2. The Grimm troop. 7 carefully climbed the cliffs, this time careful not to fall off. He had fallen too many times already, and he did not need to fall another time. He slipped his fingers into the right places where he could get a good grip and slipped his feet where he could get a good foothold. Many times he could walk on the cliff and that was rewarding to him. He arrived at the top of the cliff and walked along the path lit with lights. He came to another side of the cliff where he could see small town lights along with some sort of red fiery light. He looked down and found out he needed to scale down the cliff to get to it. Just my luck. He thought. 7 scaled down to cliff and once he got to the bottom, he wandered through the long twisty tunnel ahead of him. He came to a large open door with a perfect view of the town ahead. His excitement turned to annoyance once he figured out he needed to climb down another wall. He grunted and then climbed down. He got to the bottom without injury and made his way into the town. He looked and saw 2 red tents outside the town. The first one was large, but the second one was much smaller. In front of the big tent there were 2 steeds sitting in front. 7 walked past and made his way into the center of the town. There, he saw a bench and nearby there was an old bug holding a glowing white flower as if it was his child. The bug noticed 7 and turned towards him. "Ah, hello there little one," the bug said. "I am Elderbug. I must say, it's nice to see another traveler wander into our village again. Reminds me of later times." "I'm 7, 7 replied. "Nice to meet you. Young one, if you're feeling tired, why not sit on the bench? It may be iron, but it can give a good rest," Elderbug said. "Okay, thanks." 7 walked over to the bench and sat down. A warm feeling filled up inside him and he instantly felt much better. Curious about the tents, 7 decided to ask Elderbug about them. "What are the tents outside doing?" he asked. "I don't know," Elderbug replied. "They disappeared and now they're back. They give me grief looking at them. I stay away from them. But if you want to see inside them, you best be prepared." "Okay, thanks again," 7 replied. He got up from the bench and his curiosity took over again. He felt drawn to the tents. It was like they were calling out to him. He walked towards them and walked into the bigger tent of the 2. He walked through a long room and saw another large bug playing the accordion. When he went to talk to them, they spoke first. "So you called us," they said. Before 7 could reply, the bug said, "Speak to Master." 7 nodded and walked further into the tent. He came to a large open area in the center of the tent. Suddenly, 2 flaming spotlights moved around the room as a carnival music played. The 2 spotlights came together and in a burst of flames, a tall horned bug appeared, wearing a black and red cloak. "So, it was you who called us," it said in a deep, scarred voice. "Well met, my friend, well met. I am Grimm, master of this troop." "I'm 7, 7 said. "But what do you mean, I called you?" "As the lantern you lit flared, your role was cast, our compact written in scarlet fire," Grimm explained. "Eager we are to see you commence, but first, some illumination is required." In a flash of fire, a small flying bug with similar resemblance to Grimm flew toward 7 and started to float around him. "Across these lands, my kin now spread, harvesting that essence peculiar to my breed, the flame and dream," said Grimm. "Seek my kin. Claim their flame and return it to me. Together, marvel shall be achieved." "Wait, what?" 7 asked, confused. "How will I be able to find them and how will I?" "Do not fret, small one. For this task you won't travel alone," Grimm explained. "My child shall guide you to the flame and gather within itself that burning essence." From his shoulder, the Grimchild happily chirped at 7. "Like you, the child plays a key role in this task. Only with it by your side will the flame and my kin reveal themselves to you," Grimm said, and in a burst of flames, he disappeared. 7 stood still. What had he just gotten himself into? First thing he knows is he's back from the dead and in the middle of nowhere, and next, he's about to go across the land, gathering flames from brutal kin members for a child. He looked at the Grimchild, and it looked back at him, with adoring eyes. 7 sighed. He couldn't do this, he couldn't even fight decently. But he didn't want to let the Grimchild down. He walked out of the tent and slumped down on the bench. What was he going to do? Suddenly, he heard a high-pitched voice call him from one of the houses. 7 walked inside, and he saw a small fly, sitting at a desk. "Hello there," the fly said. "I heard from Elderbug you're an adventurer. That means you must know how to defend yourself, right?" it asked. 7 sighed. "I'm no adventurer," he said. "I'm just trying to find out what's going on, but I can't even use a weapon properly." The fly said. "In that case, why don't you visit the Nailmasters?" "The Nailmasters?" 7 asked. "The best of the best. They know how to wield a nail like no one else," the fly explained. "If anyone can teach you how to defend yourself, it would be them." "Well, where can I find them?" 7 asked, interested in the conversation. "The nearest one would be Nailmaster Mado. He can be found in the Howling Cliffs. Close to where you came from actually," the fly said. "Well, thank you, Sly," said the fly. "Thank you, Sly," said 7, and he walked out of the shop. He walked towards the edge of town and stared at the cliffside he came down from. He looked at the Grimchild. "Guess we're going to the Howling Cliffs," he said. The Grimchild chirped and they both set off. BH2CH3. Nailmaster Mado. 7 managed to reach the top of the cliff and walked back through the tunnels. He had to admit, it felt nice having the Grimchild with him. While they couldn't defend him or anything, it was nice to not be alone in this unknown area. 7 climbed back up to the Howling Cliffs and walked along, looking for the Nailmaster. He looked around, in caverns and caves, trying to find out where it could possibly be. He wandered down into a small cavern and saw the corpses of dead bugs and a few stray nails lying about. "Maybe I should take one to defend myself," he said to himself. He picked up a nail that was just about his size and hung it around his back. He felt the Grimchild nagging at his shoulder, so he turned around to face it. Once he turned, he saw a faint light coming from further into the cavern. We walked closer and saw it was an actual open door where the light was coming from. 7 turned towards the Grimchild. It looked at him, waiting for his gratitude. 7 smiled and the Grimchild chirped happily. 7 walked inside and found a bench surrounded by white glowing specks. He sat down and rested. Climbing the cliff sure was tiring and it wore out his hands and feet to climb those rocks. He let the particles sink into him, relieving him of his pain. As he sat, the Grimchild tucked its tentacles around it and cuddled up under his feet at the side of the bench. 7 couldn't take it. The Grimchild was a literal baby and it really depended on him. That's why he needed to learn how to defend himself. So he could protect them. All rested up, 7 got up from the bench and the Grimchild got up with him. They both wandered into the structure and 7 saw an almost giant bug sitting under a hole in the roof where light was peeking through. 7 walked towards the bug and it lifted its head up to look at him. "Ah, well met. Yes, I thought I could sense the aura of a fierce warrior approaching," the bug said. "I'm impressed you found my sanctuary here at the top of the world. No doubt you've endured many trials and overcome many foes in your quest to find me." "I have, but I'm no warrior," 7 said, leaning his head down. "I'm nothing but a weak child. I came here so that I could learn how to defend myself and my friends here." "No, don't speak another word," the bug said. "I, Nailmaster Mado, who was taught the art of the nail by the great nail sage himself, hereby accept you as my pupil. Let us begin the lesson immediately." Mado stood up and roared. "Now, draw your nail and I'll teach you how to use it," he said. 7 pulled out the nail and Mado walked over. "First, your attack position," he said. "Keep your knees bent, it'll provide more balance. Hold your nail as if you are ready to strike. Use your remaining arm to guard, hold it in front of you to defend against an attacker." 7 did as Mado said and Mado nodded. "Good, now let's go over basic defense and offense," he said and he got over to the other side of the room. "Move your nail to block my attacks," he said and held his nail out in front of him. Mado swung his nail above his head and 7 blocked, holding his own nail in front of him. Mado swung from the side and 7 held his nail to the sides. Mado then swung his nail down and 7 held his nail upside down and blocked the swings. "Very good. You are a fast learner, I see," Mado said. "Now, attack me in the ways I attacked you." 7 nodded and swung his nail overhead, to the sides, and from below. Mado parried every blow and then suddenly thrust his own forward. 7 leaned out of the way, barely avoiding the thrust. "You must always be ready, you never know when an enemy could strike," Mado bellowed. "Now, attack me with all you've got." 7 nodded and the two clashed nails. 7 blocked Mado's swings and swung back with his own. Mado swung his nail overhead and 7 jumped out of the way as the nail slammed into the ground. Mado swung the nail from below and 7 jumped over it. He then swung from below while Mado was off guard. "Excellent," Mado said. "Avoiding instead of blocking, using your size to your advantage and attacking once the enemy has attacked. You are indeed a swift learner." Mado and 7 rested their nails and Mado began to speak once more. "Now that you know the basics of the art of the nail, I shall teach you a nail art," he bellowed. "A nail art?" 7 asked. "Yes. A special form of the nail, taught by the great nail sage himself," Mado said. "I shall teach you the cyclone slash." Mado demonstrated by soaking in some sort of energy and then spinning around swiftly. 7 watched in awe. "Now, getting the art right is a little tricky. It took me a few years to get it perfect," Mado said. "What you need to do is focus all of your energy into the weight of your nail and then release it by letting your nail pull you while moving in a spiral." "Okay, how do I focus my energy?" 7 asked. "Calm your mind, let all of your thoughts slip away and keep your focus on your nail," Mado explained. 7 nodded and took a deep breath. He closed his eyes and let his thoughts pass by. His questions, his reasons for doing this and just focused on the nail in his hands. Ready, he spun and found himself spinning along with his nail as it swung around at a rapid pace. The Grimchild cheered and Mado stood there watching. "Marvelous, absolutely marvelous," he bellowed. "You've done it so well. It's almost like you knew from the start. You remind me of my first pupil. They were silent and focused and did excellent at the lessons. Your focus reminds me clearly of them." Mado looked through the hole in the roof at the sky. "I hope that they are doing well," he said. "Thank you for teaching me, Master," 7 said, and the master and student bowed. 7 walked out of the room with the Grimchild and knowledge of how to protect them both. He now felt confident, strong, and ready to take on the task that the Grimm troop asked of him, and more. PH2CH4. First encounter. 7 climbed back down to Dirtmouth, this time being able to fight back against the hostile bugs along the way. When he got to the bottom and sat down on the bench, it hit him that he had no idea where to go and no way to buy a map. 7 slouched down deep into the bench. "How am I going to find out where I need to go?" he said aloud to himself. Suddenly, he felt the Grimchild moving around in his cloak. Before he could ask what it was doing, it came out, holding a compass in its mouth. 7 looked closely and saw it was the same compass that he found from the Howling Cliffs. He must have picked it up without noticing. He took the compass and began to study it. Suddenly, a burst of red light came from the compass and an entire structure image appeared in front of him. Upon closer inspection, he saw the structure was a series of tunnels and above them was Dirtmouth. It was an entire map of the land. And on the map, there were 3 places marked with a red flame. Those must have been where he needed to go to find Grimm's kin. 7 turned over to the Grimchild, who was eagerly watching and waiting to see if 7 was grateful or not. "What would I do without you, little guy?" he said, patting the Grimchild's forehead. The Grimchild chirped happily as he patted it. "Alright, which flame's the closest?" 7 asked, looking back at the map. His eyes were drawn to a close, red marking on the map in a tunnel not too far away. He looked back at the Grimchild and it nodded, understanding where he wanted to go. Without another word, 7 and the Grimchild started off towards the first flame. They moved along out of Dirtmouth to another cliffside with an elevator at the bottom. Relieved that he didn't have to climb another cliff, 7 stepped inside and the elevator started up. The Grimchild flew up close behind. Once at the top, 7 stared at the illuminating tunnel of crystals in front of him. It was so bright and beautiful. 7 would have stayed there forever if the Grimchild hadn't bumped into him. Remembering why he was here, 7 walked into the tunnel and looked over the valley of crystals below him. He cautiously made his way across, making sure not to lose his grip. He moved slowly along the crystals, careful not to step on their sharp points. Finally, he managed to get to a large piece of land above the sharp crystals. In front of him was a torch holding a brilliant scarlet flame. As soon as he stepped towards it, however, it vanished in a burst of flames and a playful laugh echoed through the caverns. Suddenly, a small, stout figure appeared in the air, giggling as it held the torch. A Grimmkin. It swung the torch and 3 red fireballs flew from the flame on top. 7 quickly evaded the fireballs and the next thing he knew, the Grimmkin was flying towards him. Thinking fast, 7 rolled to the side and held his nail in front of the Grimmkin. It flew into the blade of the nail, then vanished into another burst of flames. It appeared behind 7, flung some fireballs, and repeated the process several times. "This guy is so annoying," 7 yelled in frustration. The Grimmkin happily giggled. It was pleased by 7's anger. The Grimchild, however, was not happy that the Grimmkin was laughing at its bearer. It flew right up to the face of the Grimmkin and waved around, causing it to drop its guard. 7 seized the opportunity and struck the Grimkin twice with his nail. The Grimkin charged, but 7 was ready. He concentrated all of his energy, and right when the Grimkin charged, he unleashed a cyclone slash, striking it several times. The Grimkin screamed and dispersed into several red flames. The Grimchild flew into the center of the red flames, and instantly, the Grimchild consumed all the flames in the area. Then, it flew over to 7, concerned if its bearer was hurt. "I'm fine," he grunted, standing back up. "You really helped me out there, you know," he told the Grimchild. "I honestly don't know how I would have taken him down without you." The Grimchild flew around him, happily chirping. 7 giggled. Who knew this little guy would be so worth fighting for? He thought. He pulled out the compass and saw the first flame had disappeared. He looked and saw 2 more flames on the map. One in a green area closely below Dirtmouth and one near the center of the tunnels. This is gonna take a while. He thought. He scaled across the crystals on the floor of the cavern, back to Dirtmouth. He needed to take a break to refresh himself. As his mind wandered off, he slipped and fell towards a very sharp crystal, pointed right at his chest. He braced himself, but he never felt the pain. He opened his eyes and saw he was inches away from the crystal. He looked behind him and saw the Grimchild holding his shirt in its mouth, desperately trying to keep him from falling into the spikes. 7 pulled himself back up and just stared at the Grimchild. Despite just being a bear, it really thought of him as a father. 7 chuckled to himself and continued back towards Dirtmouth. H2CH5. Grimkin novices. 7 climbed out of the crystal caverns and rode down to Dirtmouth on the elevator. He slumped onto the bench again and found himself questioning yet again. It seemed like the only thing he knew how to do at this point. Question and ponder and think. He knew so little about this world, about these creatures, and about the Grimm troop. All he could do at this point was question after all. "This is going to be a long trip," he said, looking at how far the other flames were on the map. "Need help getting somewhere?" Elderbug said from the right. 7 and the Grimchild nodded. "Why not take the Stag Station?" Elderbug said. "They can take you almost anywhere and they don't charge any geo." "Oh, okay," 7 replied. He enjoyed having people to answer his questions. It really helped, being in a new environment. It was also nice that there were nice people in this place. He thought back to the Maw, where there were hardly any people who were as nice as Elderbug, aside from the gnomes. 7 got off the bench and walked into the Stag Station building. He rode another short elevator down and there was nothing but a bell in front of him. He rung the bell and without hesitation, an enormous bug ran up to the platform. "Hey," it said. "I thought this tunnel was blocked off by the infection," it said. "Then again, that sickly air that fills the tunnels has started to fade," it said, pondering on its thoughts. Excuse me," 7 said, trying to get the attention of the stag. "Oh, hello little one. Are you the one that rung the bell and called me here?" it asked. "Yes, my name is 7. You remind me of another one who used to ride my stations, especially with that little one," the stag said. "Who, this little guy?" 7 asked, pointed to the Grimchild. "Yes. They traveled all over the kingdom for that child and they seem to have shrunk the last time I saw them." 7 looked over at the Grimchild and saw it had no idea what the stag was talking about. Could there have been a bearer for the Grimchild before him? If so, could they help? "If you're helping the child, perhaps you'd like to go to the places that the first one went, right?" the stag asked. Yes, that would be great," 7 replied, snapping himself back to reality. 7 got on the back of the stag and the Grimchild cuddled up underneath him. If there was another bear, the Grimchild clearly didn't remember them. It seemed to imprint the position of bearer on him like he was the first. But 7 just became curious and curious as he rode the stag. The ride was bumpy and fast, but 7's mind distracted him. It felt like all he could do was question. The stag came to a halt and 7 got off, moving to the bench. As they moved out into the open of the lush green caverns they were now in, 7 looked at the Grimchild. It looked back and just stared at him with a look that had so many sentences inside. "What is it? What did I do wrong? Do you need something from me?" Those were the things that could come out of that look. "I need a name for you, don't I?" he asked the Grimchild. The Grimchild just shrugged with its tentacles it used to fly. "What about, Junior?" The Grimchild shook its head. "Flame? Torch? Child? Partner? Buddy?" The Grimchild shook its head for all of them. "Friend?" 7 asked. The Grimchild stopped and then shrugged. It was okay. "Okay friend," 7 said. The two followed the compass to the flame, crawling through thorn bushes and battling mouths and moss-covered bugs. 7 found a way to bait the snapping mouths into revealing themselves and then defeating them with a few strikes from his nail. He was able to predict the patterns of the mossy bugs and the Grimchild managed to lure one to death by flying through one of the mouths and getting it to eat the bug. It smiled at Seven, wondering if it did well, and Seven smiled back. They made their way to a bridge over an acid lake and met another Grimkin novice. Ready for the attack this time, Seven jumped at the foe, swiping at it with his nail. The Grimkin vanished and swooped down for its next attack. Seven jumped over it and struck down with his nail, plummeting them down to the ground. The Grimkin warped behind Seven and flung 3 fireballs at him. Seven evaded the attack and once again struck the Grimkin. The cycle went on until the Grimkin let out a scream and burst out into flames. The Grimchild absorbed the flames and the two of them went back to the stag station. After another bumpy ride, Seven and the Grimchild arrived at their next stop. Now, the nausea of the rides was getting to Seven since he didn't have his thoughts to occupy him. He sat down at the bench and shook the dizziness and nausea away. He and the Grimchild stepped out of the station and this time, the flame was rather close. Seven approached the flame and the Grimkin appeared before them. Seven jumped at the Grimkin, but it simply vanished away in a burst of flame. Seven kept his guard up, looking for where it could appear next. Suddenly, the Grimchild shrieked and Seven turned around just as the Grimkin slammed into him. He fell down a series of platforms and into a room filled with corpses of bugs his size. The Grimkin followed him in and Seven delivered a swift strike with his nail. The battle between the two continued and soon, Seven gave the finishing blow and the Grimchild absorbed a final flame. But the task now done, Seven climbed back up to the stag station, ready to go back to the Grimm troop. But as he walked up, he tripped over a barrel. He fell down and suddenly, he saw something he thought he would never see in this world. A gnome. It scurried away, but then looked back at Seven as if it was beckoning for him to follow. Seven's curiosity overwhelmed him and he followed the gnome, running through the tunnels. The Grimchild followed, not wanting to leave its bear, and the two followed the gnome deeper and deeper into the city, unaware of what would happen next. PH2CH6. The barber shop. Seven followed the gnome deeper and deeper into the caverns. He soon found himself in some sort of city. It was in a very poor state. Buildings were almost crumbling, some were bent over, and the main building in the center had completely collapsed. As heavy rain beat down on his back, Seven found himself starting to shiver. He looked back at the Grimchild, who was completely shaking in the cold. Seven looked for the gnome and saw it run into a building. He followed it inside, desperate to get out of the cold. While he was wearing a cloak from the Grimm troop, it barely did anything for him. He and the Grimchild relaxed as they took shelter inside the building and dried themselves off. Hopefully there would be a shortcut to another stag station because neither of them wanted to go back out in the rain. In the meantime, Seven started to wander around the structure. It looked pretty much abandoned and there were a bunch of empty chairs everywhere. This place must have been popular back in the old days, but now, it looked like the perfect place for a haunted house. The thought of that made Seven gulp. Now he knew something could be hiding in here. If so, he needed to be careful. He wanted himself and the Grimchild to make it out of this place alive. So he drew his nail and walked along with caution. As he walked through, he noticed a series of paintings scattered the walls. The people there looked distorted and eerie. He studied the paintings and saw one that looked much different from the rest. The person was distorted, but the canvas itself, it had something floating around it. Seven felt himself being called by the painting. Something wanted him to touch it. He inched closer and several dream catcher floated around the painting. It wasn't just him. The Grimchild was also intrigued. It seemed to have Seven's curiosity rubbed off onto it. Seven reached forward and let a single finger touch the dry, entrancing canvas. Suddenly, a burst of dream catcher particles flew out of the painting, sending him and the Grimchild to the floor. Seven opened his eyes and found himself in another area. It shared many similarities with the previous area, but everything was out of place and nothing looked the same. It didn't feel deserted anymore. It felt like there was someone inside with him. Seven stood up and searched for his nail, but for some reason, it wasn't here at all. Suddenly, Seven remembered the Grimchild. He quickly looked around for them and found them on the floor. A sigh of relief escaped Seven's breath as the Grimchild flew up to him. With his friend by his side, Seven walked over into another room. The empty chairs were now full. Filled with mannequins, each with a unique hairstyle. Seven moved past them and suddenly, their faceless heads turned towards him and the Grimchild. Their hands reached out for them as they started to crawl towards them, reaching out for them. Seven ran away as quickly as he could, the Grimchild close behind. He climbed up a large shelf as the mannequins shook it, desperately reaching out for him. Seven got to the top of the shelf and crawled into a nearby vent. He and the Grimchild escaped from the chaos in the room and into the next. Inside that next room, there was a series of large boxes. Seven moved closer to the boxes and began to examine them closely. He managed to make out a few words. From the doctor, he read aloud. He looked at the Grimchild and they both began to ponder. Who was the doctor? And what did they have to do with this place? Suddenly, Seven felt a pulse of curiosity run through him. He looked at the box in front of him. He peeled off the tape that was keeping it shut and moved away the covering. Inside was a perfect mannequin with long hair and a long beard. Seven stared at the mannequin. Was the doctor the source of all these mannequins? But if the hair was so long for the mannequin in the box, why did the ones outside have their hair cut shorter? Seven was pulled from his thoughts by a loud snap. He looked in the direction but heard a series of footsteps. Slowly, he tiptoed closer to the sound and peered around the corner. He stared at the large figure in front of him. They had thin legs but an enormous body. In their hands was a giant pair of scissors. The figure moved the scissors across, cutting the hair on one of the mannequins. Seven spotted a door at the end of the room that was creaked open. He creeped across the room, careful not to get the creature's attention. The Grimchild moved slowly as well, no letting out one of its usual chirps. All was going well until Seven stepped on a single loose floorboard. A creak entered the room and the figure's head turned towards the two. It was the same face as the one on the painting. The figure wobbled towards them, his scissors snapping as he walked. Seven didn't waste any time. He sprinted through the door and into the next room. The barber followed them, his scissors snapping along with every step he took. Seven frantically searched for a way to escape, his eyes darting around the room. He spotted a small crack in the wall and slid into it. The Grimchild flew through the crack as well, just before the barber snipped them. But that didn't mean that they were out of danger yet. The barber walked through a door that Seven didn't see, right towards them. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Seven thought as he continued running. He slipped under a desk, hoping that would give him some time to breathe and think of a way out. But the barber snipped the desk to pieces with his scissors, leaving Seven and the Grimchild exposed. Seven continued running, desperately trying to find a way out. It was no use. They ran into a dead end, with nowhere else to run to. Seven stared at the barber as his scissors snapped and snapped. The barber walked right up to Seven, his scissors open wide. Seven braced himself and then, the scissors closed. H2CH7. Barber. Seven gasped as he woke up. He was still in the room, but this time no one was there. He frantically searched himself for any blood or injuries, but there was nothing, he was perfectly fine. Seven let out a sigh of relief, but then remembered there was no one else in the room. The Grimchild was missing. Not even caring about the barber, he yelled for the Grimchild at the top of his lungs. "Friend. Grimchild," he yelled. He waited and waited for a reply and then, he heard the faintest of chirps from the Grimchild. It sounded scared, frightened, and panicked. Seven pulled himself up to the ground and started following the sound as fast as he could, hoping he could find his missing friend. He ran around the room, looking and looking for any way out of the room, to find the Grimchild, its cries still echoing through the walls. Seven kept looking and then he spotted something unusual. A glitched image of a girl with a braid stood on top of a shelf, looking down at him. They beckoned, asking him to follow. Seven climbed to the top of the shelf, expecting to meet this strange girl. But once he got to the top, they were nowhere to be found. But where she stood, there was a door to a vent. Seven pulled the door open and started crawling through. But soon, he found himself in a maze, with several ups and downs, and twists and turns. He searched for a way to navigate the maze, and in the corner of his eye, he spotted the girl. He followed the girl, crawling after her in the vents. Whoever she was helping him, and that was all Seven needed at the moment. He followed her through the maze, and then fell out from a loose vent cover. At this point, he was starting to panic. He could hear the Grimchild calling out for him, its cries getting closer and closer. That meant that he was getting closer. Closer to finding them. As he rushed through the halls of the barber shop, he came running through a room filled with mannequins. They all spotted him and instantly began crawling towards him. Seven drew his nail and preformed a cyclone slash. Surprisingly, the mannequins stopped in place. They stopped crawling and their hands rested on the ground. Once the slash was over though, they started swarming over to him again. Seven swung with his blade and the mannequins stopped again. Were they afraid of his nail? Or was it something else? Seven didn't care, he swung his nail frantically and violently through the crown of mannequins and stormed to the door on the other side of the room. He opened the door and slammed it behind him. He looked up and stared right into the eyes of the barber. He heard the Grimchild cry and saw it wrapped up on a chair in front of him. The barber must have been planning to cut it. The barber walked right toward Seven, his scissor blade slicing with every step he took. Seven fought back with his nail, managing to prevent the scissors from closing in on him again. Suddenly, the scissors closed in on his nail and the barber flung it across to the other side of the room. Backing into a corner, Seven panicked, trying to find some sort of weapon to fight back with. He bumped into a shelf and something caught his eye. A bottle of aftershave. He pried off the entire cap and flung the bottle right into the barber's face. The barber screamed, wiping the burning substance from his eyes. Seven didn't waste any time. He ran over to his nail, then ran to the Grimchild and cut it free. It curled up around him, scared for its life. Seven ran back through the door and swung his nail to avoid the mannequins. He heard the barber's footsteps following him and his eyes darted around the room, looking for a possible escape. His eyes sprung to a wall with weak board holding it up. He ran towards it and unleashed a cyclone slash, shredding up the boards. Seven ran through the opening, the Grimchild shaking underneath his neck. They were both afraid. Very afraid. Seven's heart jumped as he heard the barber break through the wall and close in on both of them. He had to fight back, there had to be a way to get rid of this horrifying creature. Seven ran through room after room, the barber following them without even thinking. As the barber chased them, Seven tried to think of a plan. Suddenly, he tripped over a long rope, knotted onto the wall. An idea came together in his mind at that very moment. He tied the rope into a lasso and flung it around the barber's neck. The hoop landed around him and the rest fell behind, away from his scissors. Just as Seven thought, the barber didn't even care about the rope. Seven kept running, clutching the Grimchild as it held onto him in absolute terror. The doctor followed them, his scissors violently snapping back and forth. As he chased them, the rope began to tighten around his neck. The knotted end still strong, being pulled along. Seven kept running and running until he found a large elevator shaft. Perfect. He thought. He jumped down the shaft and landed on the elevator, not too far away. He looked up just in time to see the barber jump down after him. Suddenly, the rope tightened. Now where? The barber scrambled for air as he hung in the elevator shaft, the newly made noose tied around his neck. His limbs frantically swung around until suddenly they stopped and hung lifelessly from his body. Seven took a deep sigh of relief. The Grimchild flew out from his shoulders and flew around him, now feeling safe and happy. A smile came across Seven's worn-out face. It was worth it. The Grimchild was now safe. Noticing a hole in the elevator, the two slipped down into the elevator where the door was creaked open to another room. Inside that room was a series of paintings across the wall. Seven looked and saw a few very peculiar paintings. There was one of a large tower, the face of an old tall thin man, and a heart painted scarlet red. One of the paintings stood out to him. There was a painting of a boy, his face covered with a paper bag and a bug, wearing a horned white shell. The Grimchild flew up to the painting and stared at the small horned bug. Did it look familiar to them? Did they know it? Suddenly, Seven's eyes locked onto a blank painting, with dreamcatcher particles flying out of it. Their way out of this horrific nightmare. The Grimchild flew over to him and he pressed his hand onto the canvas. In a big burst of light, Seven opened his eyes and found himself lying down on the floor of the same room they entered through. The Grimchild woke up right next to him and helped him to his feet. Was it just a dream? Seven wondered, looking around the room. Every painting in the room was still exactly the same, except for one. The painting of the barber changed, with a rope hanging around his neck, his eyes bodied in gray. It wasn't a dream after all. PH2CH8. First evolution. As Seven crawled back to the stag station, exhausted, nothing but fear moved through his head. Fear for himself, fear of death, fear for the Grimchild. They were so scared back in the barber shop and he could hardly do anything to help them. If it hadn't been for that girl, he would have never found the Grimchild in time. And that was another question. Who was the girl who helped him? Seven was terribly confused to the point where it felt like he couldn't take much more of this. But he couldn't stop. Not now. He arrived at the station and he and the Grimchild rode back to Dirtmouth, feeling safe from any sort of danger there. The Grimchild stayed curled up around him the entire time. Once they got off, Seven turned towards the Grimchild, staring at them right into their empty eyes. "Listen, I will never let you die," he said to them. "I promise, I will do everything I can to keep you safe and let you live a life free of danger." But as he said that, he didn't know if he could keep that promise. A life free of danger was something everyone wanted where he was from. But so many dangers lurked everywhere in that place. Even here, danger seemed to be lurking everywhere. But even if he couldn't keep his promise, the Grimchild nodded, feeling the fear in its bearer's eyes. As Seven thought about his past, he began to think further to when he first wound up here. When he first woke up in the cliffs. How did he get there? And more importantly, what happened to him? His memory was foggy, he could only remember a few parts and unfortunately they were the painful ones. He remembered his body being crushed and morphed into a gnome and then standing in front of a girl who was wearing a yellow raincoat, offering her a sausage. The girl walked closer and grabbed onto him and Seven woke back to reality before the terror. He remembered what he was doing and walked over to Grimm's tent at the edge of Dirtmouth. He walked inside and was almost instantly greeted by Brum. "Ah, the child burns with flame," he said, still playing on his accordion. "Speak to master," he followed. 7 gave a silent nod and walked towards the center of the tent. He approached the center of the ring and in a flash of brilliant scarlet flame, Grimm appeared before him. "I can feel it," he said. "The warmth of the flame you've gathered together." He turned his head to 7 and nodded. "A masterful opening act. The air hums with excitement." He turned his head and looked into the eyes of the Grimchild. "Dear child, you've done so well. Let your fire burn even brighter," he said. But the simple snap of his fingers, a mass of red flame surrounded the Grimchild and flew into it. 7 turned, concerned and confused on what was happening. Once the dust settled, he looked at the evolved Grimchild. Its singular horn was now grown into 2 horns and it had more tendrils coming from its body, stretching further than before. "Beautiful, yes," Grimm said. "The child has grown from mild youth to deadly companion. About these dangerous lands, its aid will no doubt be welcome." "I sure hope so," 7 thought to himself. He remembered how scared he was during the encounter with the barber and how helpless the Grimchild was. He didn't want to be in a situation like that again. He wanted someone to help. Someone to stay by his side. And with the evolution of the Grimchild, it seemed like he got his wish. "Just don't neglect our dance, for it too continues," Grimm said, turning toward 7. "Keep hunting that scattered scarlet essence. When the child id filled with flame once more, return to the stage and the performance will begin." And with that, Grimm twirled into a burst of scarlet flame and vanished from sight. "I wonder what he's talking about," 7 thought. What dance? What performance? Was this some kind of show? Or something else? The call of the Grimchild snapped him out of his questions and drew him back to the task at hand. He walked out of the tent and pulled out the compass, looking around for the flames. He spotted one close by in the King's Pass. He looked back to the cliff surrounding Dirtmouth. "I always have to come back to those cliffs, don't I?" he thought to himself. He signed and began the long climb. Once he got to the main gate, he wandered around the caves, looking for the next Grimkin. He searched the caves, looking at every corner, making sure to defeat any enemy that came in his way. He stumbled through the floor all of a sudden and found himself right in front of the torch of the Grimkin. In a flash of red flames, the Grimkin master revealed himself and zoomed toward 7. 7 barely had any time to dodge. He jumped out of the way, landing face first on the hard gravel. He struggled to stand up as the Grimkin warped behind him. 7 finally got to his feet to defend himself, but to his shock, the Grimchild was protecting him. It shot out small fireballs from its mouth, hitting the Grimkin and throwing it off. 7 leapt at the distracted Grimkin and struck it to the ground with his nail. Angered, the Grimkin warped away and unleashed a spinning wheel of fireballs. 7 managed to avoid them and the Grimchild continued attacking. 7 jumped forward just as the Grimkin zoomed towards him and slammed him into the floor. With that done, 7 charged up a cyclone slash and unleashed it onto the Grimkin, dealing several blows. The Grimchild spat out the final hit and the Grimkin vanished into flames. The flames crowded around the Grimchild as it absorbed them, consuming the first of 3 more flames. 7 looked back at the Grimchild. It had grown a great deal. From the helpless child in the barber shop into his trusty companion that was not afraid to fight back for him. 7 smiled and the Grimchild smiled back. Grimm was right. Its aid was no doubt welcome to him. Ch2ch9. Growing trust. 7 walked along the cliffs, admiring the new strength of the Grimchild. Their company and aid in battle had proven to be very useful when it mattered most. As he thought about them and his journey, he remembered the nail art that Mado had taught him. The cyclone slash was indeed a useful technique for him and had gotten him out of many situations. That got him thinking. If one nail art was useful, then how strong would he be if he knew all the nail arts? Sly did tell him there were nail masters, not a nail master. As he thought, he remembered that Mado lived close by on the cliffs. If anyone knew about the other nail masters, surely it would be him. Eager to find out about the other nail masters, 7 began climbing up to the howling cliffs where Mado resides. The Grimchild was confused. There wasn't a flame that way. Why was its bearer climbing the cliffs? 7 looked back at the Grimchild. "Don't worry, we're just going to see an old friend," he said. The Grimchild nodded in understanding and they both began climbing up to the top of the cliffs. Once there, they made their way to Mado's hut, walked inside and found Mado meditating under the light like usual. 7 approached and Mado looked down at him. "My pupil, you have come to visit your old master," he said. "This is an honor I scarcely deserve." "I came to ask about something," 7 said, walking closer to Mado. "Do you know of the other nail masters?" Mado sat there silently, processing what 7 had just said. "Please, sit. You are always welcome to meditate with me," he said, ignoring the question. 7 was about to ask again, but as he walked up to Mado and reached his hand forward, he heard Mado's voice speaking in his head. "My brother, Shio, how fare you in that green kingdom of thorns you call home?" he heard Mato say. Seven was concerned. Mato's mouth wasn't moving, so how could he hear him? Intrigued, he kept listening. "I think of you every time I raise my nail," he heard. "Do you ever close your eyes and remember the time we spent together with Oro and our master? I like to think you do." Seven came back to reality and for the first time, noticed the dream catcher particles in the room with him. It was just like back at the nightmare lantern when he touched the corpse and red dream catcher particles appeared. Was this interaction with Mato similar to that? He took a bit of time to think about what he heard Mato say. Green Kingdom of Thorns. Could he mean Green Path? That place did have a lot of thorns and the name clearly said it was green. That seemed like a good place to look for his brother Shio. With his business finished, he bowed to Mato and left the room. He pulled out his compass and found out that there was an entrance to Green Path from the cliffs. He maneuvered through the tunnels and obstacles of the cliffs down to a small opening into the lush green environment of Green Path. The Grimchild followed close behind and they began to search for the second Nailmaster. Seven looked at his compass and thought. Where could Shio possibly be? Mato said Kingdom of Thorns, so maybe a place filled with thorns would be where he would reside. He pinpointed a tunnel of thorns with a small shack at the end of it. That would have to be where they could find Shio. Seven and the Grimchild made their way down to the tunnel and Seven saw his first problem. Thorns covered the floor and roof of the tunnel, with flying, spiked bugs flying around. This would be a problem. He couldn't fly, he didn't have a way of teleporting to the other side, so how could he pass? There was a tunnel above him, but it could only be opened from the other side. Suddenly, he got an idea. The Grimchild. It could fly to the other side, open the tunnel, and he would be able to cross. He looked at the Grimchild and explained his plan. As soon as he finished, the Grimchild started shaking terribly. Seven could tell why. It didn't want to leave its bear. Not again. "Listen, I know you're scared to leave for a while, I am too, but we both need to become stronger. Otherwise, we won't survive. You know how close we got to death with the barber," he said. The Grimchild looked into the eyes of its bearer, shaking in fear. "You're not the same fragile Grimchild that you were with the barber, you're stronger now. You can defend yourself against any danger that's in this tunnel. Trust me, you can do this," Seven said, looking at the Grimchild with a comforting gaze. The Grimchild stared back and then nodded. For the first time, it broke away from its bearer and started off through the tunnel. The entire time it was gone, Seven's mind raced with fear. What if there was something horrible at the end that they didn't know about? What could happen to them? Why did he let them go? Suddenly the rock covering the tunnel above him slammed down behind him and the Grimchild came back, happily chirping. Seven couldn't feel more proud. They reunited, climbed up to the tunnel and walked through the tunnel to the other side. Once they got to the end, they had to crawl through a series of thorns until they finally arrived at the shack at the end of the tunnel. They walked inside and saw a bug looking very similar to Mato, painting a picture of a sculpture of several masks. As he approached, the figure turned and looked down at him. "A visitor? Why have you crept in here, little grub? Perhaps, like me, you have a taste for discovering new things?" he asked. "I am Shio, and in a previous life I was a nail master. Yes, the only thing that drove me was becoming stronger and honing my skills with a nail. I imagined it was my one calling in life, but that feeling faded over time. Now I seek a new calling, something that speaks to my soul and compels me forward. That's why I spend my time here, secluded, trying to master the art of creation. Painting, sculpting, these things bring a different kind of pleasure." Seven stared blankly at Shio. This was the person they came to see. Someone who had given up the art of the nail and instead stayed deep in the tunnels making art. Was the travel here all for nothing? You don't seem very moved by what I've said," Shio said. "Was it Shio the nail master you were looking for? Did you come to learn a nail art? I'll teach you if you insist." Seven eagerly nodded and with that, the lesson began. PH2CH10. Paintmaster Shio. "I don't use the nail too often anymore, but I do remember the nail art very clearly," Shio said. With that, he picked up his brush and began the lesson. "The key to every nail art is focusing your energy into your weapon," Shio said. Then he demonstrated, focusing all his energy into his brush and then he slashed with great force, flinging paint onto an empty canvas. "I prefer to use a brush as it is far more freeing and beautiful," he said. Seven took a deep breath. Concentrating his energy into his nail, he stood up straight and swung the nail with all his might. A loud sound cut through the wind as he swung the nail with a great slash. The Grimchild chirped happily and applauded with its tentacles. "Good start," Shio said. "But there is more you can do to perfect it." Shio definitely had an interesting way of teaching. Every time Seven swung, he would offer tips, corrections, and demonstrate again. By the time the lesson was done, he had painted a full picture of Seven using the great slash and the Grimchild fighting along with him. You know, for someone who has given up fighting with a nail, you sure seem to care a lot about it, Seven said. Oh, I just care about your desire, your dreams, Shio replied. It is my dream to perfect the art of creation myself. Well, best of luck, Seven said. He was about to leave when he spotted the Grimchild looking at a painting. Seven walked closer and saw it was a painting of a bug, also performing the great slash. Oh, has that painting caught your attention? Shio asked, walking over. This is my previous pupil. They were a lot like you, wanting to become stronger with a nail. They were silent, but they knew what to do when the right time came. Interesting, Seven said. Shio walked back to his painting and began a new piece. Suddenly, Seven noticed familiar flurry dreamcatcher particles and heard Shio's voice in his head. My brother, or what drove you to hide away deep down at the very edge of that ash-swept grave? He heard. Was it pride, or fear, or shame? Perhaps you should lay down your nail if it haunts you so and find a new calling that eases your soul. Seven thought about what he heard. Maybe the next nailmaster could be somewhere full of ashes. He looked back at the Grimchild to see if they knew something, but they were so fixated on the painting. It was almost as if they knew the bug in the canvas. Suddenly, the Grimchild snapped back to reality and flew over to Seven. Putting the thought of the bug in the painting behind him, Seven waved goodbye to Shio and walked out the door. Seven sat down on the bench outside and pulled out his compass, looking for what flame to go for next. The Grimchild flew around the marker at a place called Kingdom's Edge, very excitedly. Seven agreed, although he really wanted to find the next nailmaster. He had already learned so much from the first two, a third could be exponentially beneficial. With their new destination marked, they both set off to the stag station. They crawled back through the tunnel above the thorns and made their way to the stag station. Once they arrived, they stated their destination and the stag took them to the closest station. You know, I dropped 2 people off here at this station not too long ago, the old stag said. Come to think of it, one of them I've seen with that friend of yours, a long time ago. If you find them, I think they'd be happy to know their friend is okay. Seven was shocked. Could he be closer to finding the original bearer of the Grimchild? They surely had experience, so maybe they could help him take care of the Grimchild. After all, with 2 protectors, the Grimchild would be perfectly safe. And that was all Seven wanted. The Grimchild meant so much to him as his only friend and he didn't want to lose them. Seven got off the stag and quickly headed off towards the next flame. Even if he was close to the first bearer, he still needed to take care of the Grimchild. He crawled through a small tunnel, forcing him to swim in a dark, murky water. Suddenly, he felt his head begin to spin. Next thing he knew, he was in a large room with walls made of a rusty metal, surrounded by bits of wood and furniture. As he kept swimming, he felt a strong presence watching him. As he kept swimming, he could only feel them getting closer and closer until something grabbed his ankles, pulling him deep into the water. He struggled to break free, but the grip was too strong. Suddenly, he was pulled out of the water and into a hard stone surface. He opened his eyes and saw the Grimchild pulling him by his ankles into shore with its tendrils. He gasped, realizing he wasn't breathing, and pulled himself up. The Grimchild stared at him, seeing if he was okay. Seven looked around. He was back in the caverns and there wasn't a creature in sight. He must have been drowning. But the eerie feeling of something in the water with him. It sent shivers down his spine. He got to his feet and moved away from the water, making sure not to enter it again. He had a mission and he would do anything to achieve it. Once that was done, then he could start solving these mysteries. Until then, he was off to Kingdom's Edge. PH2CH11. Kingdom's Edge. Seven stepped out of the dark watery tunnel and into the wide open cave they needed to go to. It was covered in ash, with more and more falling from the sky, or rather roof. Seven pulled out the compass and looked at the flame marker. It was just a little bit below them. Seven looked down at the several ledges that he'd have to climb down to reach the scarlet light he saw in the distance. Takes me back to all the times I'd have to climb those cliffs. He thought to himself. He started climbing down the side of the cliff and without any warning, an armored corpse fell onto one of the ledges. Seven stopped in his place and looked at the corpse. Ignore the body, ignore the body. Seven thought as he continued climbing down. But as he did, more and more armored corpses fell from above. The Grimchild shivered at the sight of the corpses. Seven couldn't blame them. All he could think of was what could possibly be above them to cause that many corpses. His eye was drawn to the scarlet flame he was now right next to. He landed down on the nearest ledge and approached the flame. The Grimkin appeared and the battle began. It flung fireballs at the 2 companions and the Grimchild spit back with its own fire. Seven figured that now would be a good time to try out the great slash that Shio taught him. He charged his energy through his nail and waited for the perfect moment to strike. The Grimkin appeared in front of him and rushed towards him at full speed. Perfect. Seven unleashed the great slash, sending the Grimkin flying backwards. The Grimchild followed up with one of its fireballs. 7 changed tactics and decided to use the cyclone slash next. When the Grimkin appeared, he jumped up to it and used the nail art to land multiple hits. But to his surprise, right after he struck the Grimkin, it charged at him, sending him off the ledge. The panicked Grimchild quickly flew over and caught its bearer before he could fall too far. "Thanks friend," 7 said. With no rest, the Grimkin sent swirling flames at them, forcing them to move quickly. Luckily, 7 got close enough to deliver one final blow. With the next flame consumed, 7 pulled out the compass to find out where the last flame was. But as he was searching, he spotted a small hut near the very edge of the area. At that moment, he remembered what Shio said. Ash-swept grave was his description of where his brother Oro was. Possibly the last Nailmaster could be here. Right where they were. Excitement rushed through 7's mind as he kept climbing down towards the hut. As his excitement consumed him, he lost his focus and his hand slipped from the ledge he was holding onto and he started falling down. He fell onto ledge after ledge, bruising himself terribly. Right before he hit the boiling acid, the jaws of the Grimchild snapped onto the back of his shirt. It pulled him up to the closest ledge and let go, both of them breathing heavily. They both agreed to proceed with caution and to be aware of the dangers around them. 7 led the way through a system of tunnels towards the hut at the edge of the map. As they walked, they heard something stomping above them. 7 looked up and then, right at that moment, a giant bug fell through the roof, jumping closer to the two of them. 7 had no choice but to panic and improvise. The hopping bug moved closer to both of them and they both dashed under it once it hopped. The Grimchild fought back against the hopper with its fire the best it could, but they were clearly outmatched. 7 charged up the great slash and once the creature landed, he swung with full force. The bug fell to the ground, orange oozes coming out of it. 7 looked at the Grimchild, both of them breathing heavily. "I hope that we don't run into one of those things again," 7 said, and the Grimchild nodded. Unfortunately, he spoke too soon. As they proceeded forward, 2 more of the hopping beasts drew near. "You gotta be kidding me," 7 thought. With no time to prepare, 7 and the Grimchild made a dash for shelter as quick as they could. They climbed up into a small hole in a wall, and from there, they were able to beat back both of the hoppers. 7 couldn't help but take a deep breath. This Nailmaster better be worth the trouble. He thought. He and his companion kept moving forward and then, they found the hut where Nailmaster Oro should reside. 7 entered the hut and looked at the sitting figure in the center of the room. He was sitting, much like Mado, but unlike Mado, he seemed to be in a state of despair rather than meditating. 7 approached the Nailmaster and looked up at him. He looked back at 7 and began to speak. "HMPH. How did you find me, down here where the world ends?" he said. Before 7 could reply, the Nailmaster continued speaking. "Yes, I know why you're here. You came to learn a nail art from the legendary Nailmaster Oro," he said. "Yes, that I have," 7 replied, trying to make himself sound tough. For some reason, he felt on edge with Oro. Unlike his lessons with Mado and Shio, he felt like he needed to sound strong and brave. "It is the law of the great nail sage that I must pass down my teachings to those who are worthy," Oro began. "But no law forbids me from exacting a payment for my time. If you truly wish to train under me, prove it with Geo." 7 stuttered. "I don't have any Geo," he said. Oro grunted. "Those who do not share their strength will never learn. My master used to say that. Substitute Geo for strength and you'll have my own views on the matter. Beggin'," he yelled. The Grimchild was ready to fight back, but 7 stopped it. He knew that Geo was the only way to convince Oro to teach him. With that, he gave a slight bow and left the hut. Once outside, he slumped down onto the bench outside. He had no idea how to get any Geo. "How am I possibly going to get enough Geo to convince Oro?" he questioned to himself. As if to answer his question, his partner pulled out the compass, activated it, and flew around a certain spot close by. 7 looked closely and saw it was labeled, the Colosseum of Fools. "I can get enough Geo there?" he asked his friend. The Grimchild chirped with confirmation, and 7 smiled. "I guess I know where we're headed to next. The H2CH12. The Colosseum of Fools." 7 opened his eyes, feeling dazed and tired. What happened? He thought. Looking around, he realized he and the Grimchild were trapped in a cage. 7 instantly jumped up and gripped the bars as tightly as he could. How did they get here? Who captured them? What was going to happen next? 7 sat back down. There had to be something he was forgetting. Okay 7, think. What happened after the meeting with Oro? He thought. Trying his best, he managed to remember a few snippets of what happened. Right after they left Oro's hut, they fought their way through the tunnel against the hostile creatures of the region. Once out, they both began to climb up to the Colosseum to try and get Geo. There were a few bugs that spit some kind of orange substance at them, but luckily, they were able to prevail. but they weren't in perfect condition. Both Seven and the Grimchild were badly beaten from the climb, and it wasn't done yet. Looking at his companion, Seven decided it was time for a rest. "Okay, how about we find a place to recover before we continue?" he suggested. The Grimchild nodded and they started looking for a hospitable place to rest. They avoided as many enemies as possible, not wanting to damage their conditions any further. Eventually, they found a large area with a glowing blue cocoon above them. "I think this is a good spot, what about you?" Seven asked. His friend chirped and they both settled down to rest. Seven drifted off to sleep, feeling safe. But a while after, he was woken up by the cries of the Grimchild. Seven quickly drew his nail and fought back to save his friend. Two humanoid bugs were attacking them, each with their own weapons and bags. One of them caught Seven off guard and shoved a bag over his head. The last thing he remembered was a sharp pain in his head, the Grimchild screaming out for him, and everything going dark. Now, they were here. Seven looked at himself, figuring he was greatly injured, but surprisingly, he was fine. He had no bruises or pains around him, and even his head, which he figured to be the most damaged, was perfectly normal. Why? Did the two bugs maybe heal them? But why would they do that? Seven stood back up and once again assessed his surroundings. He and the Grimchild were in a dungeon of some kind, and all around them were bugs dressed in armor. He could hear one of them whispering in his head. "Are we all fools?" he heard the bug say. Suddenly it hit him. They weren't in a dungeon, they were in a gladiator pit. The gladiator pit in the Colosseum of Fools. Well, at least we were where we needed to be, Seven thought to himself, trying to lighten his stress. As he was thinking, two bugs walked right up to the cage containing him. One of the bugs he recognized as one of the two that captured him. The other one was unknown. It was wearing an elegant cloak and was standing tall and proud. "These two? Are you joking with me?" the unknown bug said to the other. "Trust me, those two got fight," the opposite bug said. "The little one threw us off for a good while, and when it couldn't win, it woke up the sleepyhead. That guy has some serious skills with a nail. My partner had to throw his bag over them to throw him off because he would have crushed us." "Did they now?" the cloaked bug said, thoughtfully looking down at Seven and the Grimchild. Although Seven liked to be complimented, he didn't like where this was going. They were in a gladiator pit with what seemed to be the lord of this Colosseum admiring their fighting skill. That usually never ends well. After inspecting both of them carefully, the cloaked bug spoke. "Send them into the trial of the fool," it said. "I doubt that the Lord Fool will be pleased with them. But if they prevail, you shall be rewarded," it finished looking at the other bug. Seven gulped. That wasn't the lord of the Colosseum. Whoever this Lord Fool was, Seven knew that if he and the Grimchild failed, death would be the best option. His attention was drawn to the Grimchild, who was flying around, panicked and afraid. Seven went over to console the child, but as he was about to, he felt the cage being lifted up from the ground and onto the floor above. The cage sealed up, making it more of a dark container rather than cage. As it moved up, Seven heard several voices chanting and cheering. The cage suddenly stopped moving, and Seven felt it land on a solid surface. "Ladybugs, ancient libidals." A voice rang out from the outside. "For this trial's competitors, I give you, the sleeping menaces." It yelled, and the cage dropped down, exposing both Seven and the Grimchild to the Colosseum. Sleeping menaces? Seven thought. If they were going to make fun of them, they could at least come up with something more creative. Whatever, Seven thought, drawing his nail. If it was a fight that this Colosseum wanted, then it was a fight it was gonna get. More cages were lifted up into the arena, and battle broke out. While Seven attacked, the Grimchild found an opening to throw the opponent off. Seven encountered a bug wielding a shield that was blocking his attacks. Seven looked at his friend, and almost immediately, the Grimchild started flying around, shooting fire at the enemy's head. With it now focused on blocking the fire, Seven dove in and finished it off. More foes came up, and the battle continued. The cages were smaller, and smaller roly-poly bug came out. Seven was about to attack, but the Grimchild stopped him. One look into its eyes, and Seven understood. It tried to protect him earlier and be strong, but they got captured. It wanted to redeem itself and fight for itself. Seven let his little friend fend off the roly bugs, and it smiled with delight, feeling strong. "Okay, fools," Seven yelled. "You brought us into your mess, now you're going to pay the price," he shouted at the crowd. The crowd booed and laughed. More cages came up, and Seven let a confident smile spread across his face. "Bring it on." The H2CH13. The Trial of the Fool. As more and more gladiators were dropped into the arena, Seven and the Grimchild fought with everything they had. Seven used his nail arts to make quick work of his opponents, and bugs that were airborne, he left for the Grimchild to take care of. One by one, a new gladiator entered the arena, each one with a different style of fighting. A new set of gladiators entered, each one holding large shuriken in their hands. They hurled the large weapons into the air and they came raining down onto Seven and his partner. Seven got close to deliver a good hit with his nail, but the gladiator parried with its shuriken. Seven bounced back, his mind going into overtime, trying to come up with a new plan. The Grimchild seemed to be doing fine. All it had to do was shoot its fireballs at the opponent from a long distance, and it was golden. That gave Seven an idea. If he didn't have a long-range weapon of his own, he could use his opponent's weapon against them. Once the gladiator threw its next shuriken, Seven hit it back with his nail. The shuriken flew right into the gladiator, in a glorious success. With a few repeats of the new tactic, Seven's opponent was down. But both new gladiators defeated, 4 new cages came up, raised in the air. A 4-eyed wasp creature came out from each cage and surrounded Seven and his friend. At first, Seven thought that he could let the Grimchild handle this round, but once the bugs spit out several liquid darts from their stingers, he knew he had to jump in. The Grimchild tried its best to fight back against all 4 deadly wasps, but even it realized that it needed the help of its bearer. With both of them understanding each other, they divided and conquered the Aspids, drawing their attention to one of them and the other one attacking. With the Aspids' attention being constantly switched, they fell victim to the duo's strategy. More cages came up into the air and winged gladiators emerged. They hovered above both of them, then flew closer to swing their blades at both of the meddling fools that were Seven and the Grimchild. Seven figured he could take on the winged fools with enough time and maneuverability, but suddenly, the ground below him began to shake. A platform came up from the ground, and thinking fast, Seven jumped onto it. He looked back at the floor below him and saw it filled up with loads of spikes. With his ground limited and the enemies in the air, he had to come up with a new plan to fight the gladiators before him. Completely unaware of his surroundings, one of the winged foes came down and swiped its blade at him. Seven jumped up and swung down at the enemy's head. An idea came to mind as the next gladiator swooped around. It swung its blade, but Seven jumped up towards the gladiator's head and struck it with his nail. He bounced back into the air from the reaction and he continued to swing down at the gladiator with his nail. The winged fool fell and the second one fell soon after. More cages came up from the ground, this time with the appearance of mosquitoes. They each flung themselves towards Seven and the Grimchild, but they juked them out, sending them right into the spikes below. The platform Seven was standing on started to shake, then folded up and went straight into the ground. Seven expected to land on a floor of spikes, but the spikes shrank back into the ground as well. Unfortunately, the walls of the Colosseum closed in, limiting the space of the arena. A large cage came up above them and one of the large hopping bugs burst out. Oh come on. Seven thought. He evaded the hopper's stomps and delivered quick strikes when he could. The Grimchild assisted with a barrage of fire and in no time, the hopper was defeated. More cages came up and large bugs with terrifying mouths on their heads came out. They spit acidic orange goo from their mouths, sending Seven into a state of panic. He charged up a cyclone slash and struck each bug multiple times. When they fell, Seven felt relieved, but that feeling didn't last long. Another huge cage came up above them and a larger version of the mouth bugs jumped out. The bug gave out a roar and started spitting orange goo into the air. Whenever Seven got close, the bug would swipe back with its blade-like limbs. It jumped into the air, crashing down onto the floor, then back to the place it stood before. The Grimchild landed several fireballs, but those clearly weren't enough to take down the beast. Seven used the great slash, striking the beast with everything he had. In response, the bug spit a wave of orange goo into the air. The Grimchild dragged Seven over to a safe spot, then quickly away from the limbs of the brooding Moloch. "Thanks friend," Seven said, getting his head back in the game. He used the great slash again, and this time, the beast fell to the ground, defeated. The crowd cheered at the victory of the two, but the challenge wasn't over yet. As the floor was filled with spikes, Seven was forced to the walls of the Colosseum, climbing as high as he could. Airborne enemies emerged from their cages and attacked the climbing opponent before them. Remembering how he defeated the last set of winged foes, Seven jumped off the walls and struck the enemies from above. He was repelled into the air as his weapon made contact with the shells of the bugs and made it back to the Colosseum walls. The roof of the Colosseum lowered, forcing Seven to move towards the spikes below, and a single foe awaited him. Luckily, the Grimchild was tired of doing the little work and managed to take out the enemy itself. Platforms came up from the ground as the walls expanded and Seven jumped onto solid ground. A barrage of gladiators and bugs were thrown at him and his friend, and chaos broke out. Seven used the cyclone slash to get rid of as many enemies as possible, while the Grimchild took care of the rest. The platform sunk back into the ground along with the spikes, and Seven noticed a change. There were fewer gladiators being sent against them. The Colosseum was running out of things to throw at them. Feeling confident once again, Seven finished off the last of the gladiators along with the Grimchild. The crowd cheered for the both of them as they stood in the arena, with no one left to challenge them. No fair. A voice yelled out from the crowd. There's two of them. The trial is made for only one warrior. It complained. Its complaint reached the rest of the Colosseum and soon multiple voices were booing the duo. Then let me even it out. A large fierce voice called out from behind a locked door. VH2CH14. The lobster lancer. Seven looked at the cage door on the right wall of the Colosseum. It trembled, shook, something pounding inside. The cage opened up with a burst of dream-catcher particles and a ferocious beast entered the arena. The crowd was just as shocked as Seven. They had either never seen this gladiator before or hadn't seen it in a long time. The beast revealed itself to be an armored lobster. One of its claws was cut off and in its place was a long, jagged sword. The gladiator in silver armor stood atop the large lobster with a weapon of its own, twice as long as the lobster's sword. "The people of the Sea Colosseum," the announcer said, his voice trembling as he spoke. "I give you, your long-lost champion. The lobster lancer." The crowd cheered with excitement as the figure raised its weapon on the back of its lobster beast. The cheers came to a halt and the lancer turned its head to Seven and the Grimchild. "I've seen you two fight and I must say, I'm impressed," the lancer said in a female voice. "I thought I had met my end a while ago to my elder sister, the God Tamer, and yet here I am. I pondered what to do, but once I saw you two fight in the Colosseum, I knew it was destiny." She yelled. "Yes, destiny has spoken. It has brought me back from defeat for one final battle against a worthy opponent." She pointed her lance at Seven. "Ready yourself. For I shall give you a fight you and your partner will not ever forget." Seven got into a battle stance, holding his weapon right at the lancer. Even the Grimchild got ready, filling its mouth up with fire, right at the lobster, who shared its fearless gaze. The lancer leapt off the lobster as it gave a powerful roar, and her blade clashed with Seven's. Seven jumped back and swung his nail against the lance of his opponent. The Grimchild flew around in patterns hard to predict as the lobster swung its claw and blade at it. The lancer charged forward, ready to pair Seven with her blade. Seven jumped up, striking his weapon against the lance, sending himself over the threat. He landed and struck his foe in the back with a strong blow from his nail. As he expected, the lancer recovered quickly from the attack. She leapt up into the air and slammed her lance into the ground, sending a shockwave throughout the arena. Seven evaded the attack and charged the great slash. The lancer charged again, but this time, Seven fought back with the great slash and their blades bounced back like a magnet repelled. The Grimchild continued to spit fire at the lobster attacking it, learning to predict its movements. The lobster surged forward, its claw ready to slice. Quickly, the child swooped under the claw and attacked from below. The lobster took advantage of its opponent's placement and stomped with its multiple legs. The Grimchild realized this was not the place to be and made a dash for the air above. The lobster swung its jagged blade at the child, trying to pierce it. The Grimchild looked for an opening, then noticed the nail embedded in the lobster's head. It gripped its jaws around the blade's handle and pulled with all of its might. The nail was yanked from its place and the lobster howled in pain. Noticing the pain of her pet, the lancer leapt onto the back of the lobster once again. "You two really are skilled at what you do," she said to her opponents. "But while one gladiator is strong, two are an unimaginable force of power," she bellowed. "And an army is only as strong as its weakest soldier," Seven spit back, with the Grimchild back at his side. Angered, the lobster roared and the crowd cheered in excitement. The beast leapt at the two scoundrels before it, slamming its legs into the ground. Seven rolled away and struck the legs of the lobster. His friend tried to spit fire at the lobster, but every attack it made was blocked by the lancer on top. Seven noticed the battle between the Grimchild and the lancer and figured it was time for a plan. "If we can't fight the lancer, then we'll have to destroy the beast it rides." Seven thought. "Grimchild. Attack the wound," he yelled. His partner nodded and flew to the front of the lobster. Worried for her pet's safety, the lancer blocked the fire as best she could. But as she and her lobster's focus was on the Grimchild, Seven attacked the legs, upsetting the balance of the beast. He jabbed his nail into the lobster's leg and pulled down, making a deep gash down its leg. The lobster wailed and moved around frantically, trying to stop the little menace from attacking. In an attempt to calm her pet down, the lancer's focus was drawn away from the Grimchild, giving it the perfect shot at its wounded head. The fireballs hit their target and the lobster wailed again. The lancer noticed that they were losing and quickly thought up of a counter. "Charge," she yelled to her pet. The lobster surged toward Seven, cornering him at a narrow end of the Colosseum. The Grimchild flew over to protect its bearer, falling right into the lancer's trap. Once the Grimchild realized its bearer was okay, it tried to resume the plan, but when it tried to fly to the back of the beast, the lancer swung her weapon, keeping it cornered. The lobster swung its bladed arm at Seven, clashing against his own weapon. He tried to fight back, but his area was too narrow to make a move. In a final attempt, 7 charged a cyclone slash, hoping it would be enough to get him out of this pickle. He released the cyclone, and his blade shredded the front legs of the lobster. With its balance greatly upset, the lobster fell to the floor. The fall threw the lancer off focus, allowing the Grimchild to finally get behind. Without having to worry about the lancer, 7 readied his final attack. He climbed up the wall as fast as he could, then jumped into the air, his nail ready. By the time the lancer realized what was happening, it was already too late. 7 stabbed his nail deep into the head of the lobster, and a burst of dreamcatcher particles flew out. The beast fell apart into the ground, and the lancer stood there in defeat. "Truly, a magnificent battle," she said. She bowed before 7 and the Grimchild, and a wave of dreamcatcher particles swept her away into the afterlife. PH2CH15. Nailmaster Oro. The crowd cheered for the victory of the sleeping menaces against the lobster lancer. 7 looked up at the spectators and raised his weapon in a victorious pose. A small clink was heard from the ground, followed by another and another. 7 looked up and saw that every spectator was throwing Geo at him and the Grimchild. Piles upon piles of Geo filled the arena, and 7's eyes gleamed. That was certainly more than enough Geo to convince Oro to teach him his nail art. Using some torn cloth from one of the gladiators, 7 made a few sacks and gathered up his grand total of 3,000 Geo. The Colosseum exit opened up and he and his friend left in pride. "Well, that was tough, but we have enough Geo to convince Oro now," 7 said. "Now all we have to do is go back down the cliffside again." 7 groaned. Of course he had to scale another cliffside. How could he not? "Oh well, I guess I'd better get to it then," he thought. He exited the Colosseum and found himself in a cave he didn't recognize. As he started to wander through, he suddenly heard a loud screech followed by an even bigger explosion. He looked up and saw the shell of a bug fall down, covered in embers from the Grimchild's flames. He looked back at his friend to see them looking with the eyes of a hunter, stalking its prey. It protected him. 7 proceeded through the cave, under the protection of the Grimchild, and arrived in an elevator shaft. "If I jump down this way, I'll most certainly die," he thought. He walked back through the cave and then found another small tunnel. He crawled through and found himself back in the large cavern of Kingdom's Edge. The Grimchild protected him against any enemies as he climbed down, and through their teamwork, they arrived at the bottom of the cavern with no injuries. After the long struggle against the great hoppers, they finally arrived at Oro's hut. They walked inside and they were met with the dull, saddened stare of Nailmaster Oro. You've returned," he said in a cold, emotionless voice. "So what will it be, traveler? Will you pay the price asked of you, or will you leave this place unenlightened again?" 7 pulled out his bags of Geo and handed them to Oro. "Take what I owe you, then I shall be ready to train," he said in his tough voice. Oro counted the Geo and put a total of 800 in a large chest. Then, he drew his nail and surged towards 7. He quickly blocked Oro's nail with his own, and the two clashed their weapons against each other. "You are quick on your feet, impressive for one such as yourself," Oro said. "You must always be ready to fight back against anyone. Even your teacher." The two of them continued to fight, then Oro began to charge his energy. Knowing full well what was about to happen, 7 charged his energy as well. Oro dashed at him with blazing speed as a strong blow came from his nail. 7 managed to counter with a great slash, which made Oro surprised. 7 focused his energy into his nail, and as Oro was about to attack, he unleashed the cyclone slash, which sent Oro further into his surprised state. "You clearly know how to use your nail, something not everyone can manage," he said. "Enough of this battle, it is clear I do not need to teach you how to defend yourself. We may proceed with learning the nail art." 7 gave a quick nod and readied himself. "You know how to focus your energy, so there's no need to teach you that. What is important is to know where to focus it," Oro said. "For the cyclone slash, you focus energy into your arms and weapon. For the great slash, you focus your core. For the dash slash, you focus your energy into your legs." 7 nodded and crouched down. "Once that energy is built up, leap forward with your legs, using that contained energy to send you further, and strike harder with your nail." 7 nodded and did exactly as Oro said. Once he built up enough energy into his legs, he leapt forward as if he was about to sprint and flung his nail forward. A loud cut through the air was heard, and the Grimchild chirped happily in the success of its bearer. "Good, but there is yet another way to utilize this technique," Oro said. "For my size, this would be difficult, but for one such as yourself, you should find it possible. When you jump into the air, thrust your legs as if to propel yourself through water, and you should be able to use this art in mid-air." 7 nodded and tried for himself. Once he was focused, he leapt up and preformed the dash slash in the air. The Grimchild chirped with excitement and 7 turned back to Oro. He looked down at 7 with the same stare he had before, only this time it seemed ever so slightly more at ease. HMPH. "I must say, you are an excellent pupil," he said. "Your skill with the nail and your thirst to become stronger you remind me of my brothers." He walked back to the center of the room and looked at Seven dead in the eyes. "I have taught you all I can. Go back into the world, traveler, and leave me to my solitude." He bowed, and Seven heard his voice speak in his head while dreamcatcher particles swirled around him. "Brother Mado, in your lonely home at the top of the world, do you still think of me as an enemy? In the future, if you will listen I will tell you why I chose to tread this path," Oro's voice said. Seven decided that there was no longer a need to stay here. He learned the final nail art and could now provide the Grimchild with a much stronger protection than before. He had learned all that he could here. With that, he bowed and left Oro in his solitude just like he asked. PH2CH16. Upcoming nightmares. Seven pinpointed the location of the last flame he needed and the two of them set off. They climbed back up the cliff of Kingdom's Edge and made their way to the stag station. He felt rather excited. He had come so far from the scared runaway child he used to be and was about to help the Grimchild grow as well. Both of them had greatly changed. For once, his mind wasn't pondering with questions and was focused and free. They arrived at the stag station and chose to go to a place called the Resting Grounds. They rode the stag through the tunnel and got off even closer to their destination. Once they were ready, Seven decided to encourage the Grimchild a little bit. "You excited? You just need this flame and you'll grow even stronger," he said. The Grimchild nodded and chirped with excitement and flew around, ready to fight. Seven chuckled. He started walking towards the location of the flame and his friend followed close behind. As they walked, they noticed several gravestones around the area and a podium with 3 masks in the center of the area. He continued ahead until he realized he was standing right above the flame's location. He headed down an opening he saw and ended up in a mostly open area. He looked ahead and saw the torch holding the blazing scarlet flame. Filled with confidence, Seven stepped forward and ignited the battle with the Grimkin. It put up quite a fight like usual, but Seven had learned the patterns of the Grimkin masters and had a counter for every move they had. The enemy flung its fireballs from the torch and Seven simply jumped through the gaps. He wasn't an expert fighter, yet he did know all 3 nail arts, making what blows he landed be very strong and critical. He focused his energy, waiting for a certain attack from the Grimkin. It appeared in the air above him and leaned back, ready to charge. Perfect. Seven used the great slash right as the Grimkin charged, dealing a heavy blow to his opponent. The Grimchild fought back as well, and while its fireballs were not as strong as its bearer's nail arts, they were much more consistent. The Grimkin unleashed a wheel of flames on the two, but Seven was already prepared. He already had his energy focused, so once he was in the air, he used the dash slash to deliver a critical blow to the Grimkin right away. After a while of a repeated circus act, the Grimkin was defeated and the Grimchild consumed the last flame it needed. Feeling proud, Seven started to walk back to the stag station, ready to go back to Dirtmouth and let the Grimchild evolve. He was on his way, but then he heard a familiar sound make its way into his ears. A small skittering sound. The sound of a gnome running. He felt his curiosity spike and followed the noise. He walked deeper into the cave his was in and began hearing the noise more frequently. As he got deeper, he saw a clear image of a gnome running. He knew the gnomes well. You had to be silent when you approached them to show them that you were no threat, and once you found one, you had to give it a hug to let it know you were a friend. Gnomes knew the places they were in better than anyone else and contained many mysteries that could possibly help. Seven kept following the gnomes, wondering what they could have been hiding. The Grimchild followed, sharing the curiosity of its bearer. They both followed the gnomes and soon they came to a very particular place. The walls were polished and had features and textures that looked like they were from somewhere on the sea. There were piles of luggage and scattered shoes everywhere. And there was a smell that filled the room that seemed to be reminiscent of raw meat. Upon further exploration, bits and pieces of food, raw and decomposing scattered the floor. At any point Seven could have turned back, but he felt like he was pulled toward something, as if someone was calling for help. So he kept proceeding into the darkness, unsure why, but curious to find out. Eventually, the room became much too dark and Seven could hardly see a thing. He studied his surroundings to try and find something that could be used as a light source. He picked up the scent of candle wax nearby and got an idea. "Hey, do you think you could light the area for a bit?" he asked the Grimchild. It gave off a small spark of light and Seven was able to make out a candle up ahead. "Think you could light that candle up ahead?" he asked. The Grimchild nodded and spit a fireball right at the candle. It lit up, but suddenly a flash of dreamcatcher particles filled up the room, causing Seven to black out. When he finally came to his senses, he looked around, noticing that the area around him had changed. It was lit up with several candles, the walls looked less decayed, and there was a series of large dreamcatcher particles floating around. He got onto his feet and his first concern was the Grimchild. Luckily they were right by him and not harmed at all. He felt a small wave of relief and his attention was drawn back to the room they were in. He walked around, looking for a way out of this place and noticed that the place was much more organized. The shoes that were previously scattered were now stacked on shelves too high for him to reach and the bits of food had disappeared. As he ventured further, he arrived in a room where there were suitcases piled in tall, unbalanced stacks, but that wasn't what caught his attention. The way he and the Grimchild entered wasn't there. There was only a door that didn't exist before that leads somewhere new. Seven noticed a lever and began to move one of the suitcases to serve as a boost. As he pulled, he suddenly tripped and fell down. Next thing he knew, he was crushed by hundreds of suitcases falling on top of him and he blacked out. The H2CH17. The storage rooms. Seven's eyes fluttered open. His surroundings were blurry and hard to make out. He couldn't move, almost as if he was being held down by something. He heard distant screeching, followed by the sound of tumbling, boxes, containers, suitcases. Seven's vision restored and he remembered what happened. He struggled to move under the pile of suitcases now on top of him. He heard the screeching again, which he instantly recognized as the Grimchild. He clawed at the suitcases, trying to pull himself out and he felt a mouth grip his hand. The mouth pulled his hand so much that it started to pull his entire body against the multiple layers of suitcases he was trapped under. Suddenly, his head was pulled out and he saw light again. He looked at his hand and was relieved to see the Grimchild pulling his hand in their mouth. Upon seeing its bearer, the Grimchild opened its jaw, letting Seven's hand free. Instead, it gripped its jaws around his shirt and pulled from there. Seven pushed up with his free hand and surprisingly, he got free and a small pile of suitcases fell with him. His friend helped him to his feet as he adjusted to the room. "Thanks friend," Seven said, smiling at his companion's joy. The child chirped and then they assessed their surroundings. Seven remembered the lever to the door he was trying to open and he started to move a suitcase to the foot of the wall. He got on top and jumped up. He was able to reach the lever and he pulled it down. The door opened, leading to another room, full of luggage. Seven walked into the room, looking around at the strange assortment of packages and luggage around the room. There was an elevator at the end of the room, but there was no way to activate it. It must have only been accessible from the inside. As Seven looked for another possible exit, the Grimchild flew up to a loose vent near the roof of the room. Seven smiled and started to look for a way up there. He pushed one of the luggage carriers to the wall and climbed up the pile of suitcases up to the vent. He reached for his nail to pry the vent open, but it wasn't in his possession. Seven realized that it must have still been under the suitcases he got stuck under. He knew it would be nearly impossible to move all those suitcases, so instead he looked for another weapon or tool to use. He scanned the floor, looking for something, and then spotted a small pipe. He hopped down the suitcases and made his way to the pipe. He reached his hand around it and picked it up. It was very light and it felt like it fit perfectly in his hand. He swung it around and he decided that this would be a good substitute weapon for the time being. He climbed back up to the vent and jammed the pipe into an open part. He and his partner pulled and the vent cover burst open. He pulled the pipe out and saw that its tip had broken off, making it pointed with a sharp tip. Feeling confident with his new weapon, Seven started to crawl through the vent. The vent smelled like old dust and reeked of an old candle scent. As he crawled, he felt his hands touch something sticky. He looked down and saw a splatter of old moldy wax under his hands. Disgusted, Seven tried not to breathe in through his nose, not wanting to smell the wax covering the vent. He continued crawling and reached another vent cover. He used his pipe to pry open the vent and crawled out. Seven stood up and noticed that the room he was in had wax drippings all across the floor. Was someone carrying candles through here or something? He wondered. His attention was suddenly drawn to the sound of skittering gnomes. He followed the sound, interested in where they were going. He walked through a long hallway with luggage stacked up on shelves and wax lining the center of the floor. He walked into another room with very creaky floorboards. He carefully stepped across each one, but suddenly the boards underneath him broke and he fell into another room. He landed in a large sea of old shoes, somewhat cushioning his fall. He looked for a stable surface to stand on and noticed a package nearby. He made his way to the package, moving through the shoes, when suddenly, he heard something else. He looked and saw the Grimchild was shooting at something. Something crawling through the shoes towards him. Seven frantically moved to the package and pulled himself on top of it. Whatever was crawling towards him earlier, it must have noticed he was no longer there because it stopped moving. But it didn't move from its spot. Seven knew this because the Grimchild was still shooting at the shoes, not hitting anything. Seven looked at the sea of shoes and noticed a rope at the end of the room, leading back to the room above. He looked back at where the Grimchild was shooting and took a deep breath. He jumped back into the shoes and hastily crawled to the next surface he could stand on. The creature followed him, the shoes moving and tapping against each other as it moved. Seven climbed onto the next surface, then jumped to the next few, getting him ahead of the shoe monster. All that was in front of him and her rope was a long sea of shoes. Seven hoped he had enough of a head start and jumped into the shoes once more. He crawled as fast as he could, hearing the monster chasing after him as he moved. He pulled himself through the shoes, trying to get to the rope. The Grimchild realized that there wouldn't be enough time to get to the rope. Thinking fast, it flew ahead, grabbed the rope in its jaws, and pulled it toward his bearer, reaching out for it. Seven grabbed the rope and pulled himself out of the shoes just before the creature was about to reach him. He climbed up to the room above and fell to his knees. "Thanks, little guy," he told the Grimchild. All it did was happily smile and then help Seven to his feet. The two of them progressed further and the smell of wax seemed to be getting worse and worse. Seven kept walking, not wanting to smell the wax, breathing through his mouth. Suddenly, he heard a weird sound. It sounded like a rope was moving something. He continued walking and saw a few gnomes scurrying away from something. Seven looked down the hall the gnomes came from and saw what they were running from. A man made of wax was being pulled by a rope from his neck and was carrying luggage onto the shelves. Seven tiptoed past, but suddenly, his foot stepped into a pile of old wax, making a loud sploosh. Seven turned and saw the wax man looking straight at him, and within a few seconds, the rope was pulling the man towards him. Seven frantically looked for a way to escape and he spotted something or someone familiar. It was the glitched girl he saw from his encounter with the barber. She was moving her hand, beckoning Seven to follow her. He did so without a second thought. He ran towards the girl and suddenly fell through a vent that he didn't see and hit the floor, blacked out. PH2CH18. The wax bellman. Seven opened his eyes. "I gotta stop getting knocked out, this doesn't seem good for my health," he thought. He got up and sat up in a pile of wax. He shook himself off, disgusted. He looked for the Grimchild, who was right next to him, and noticed that they were in a vent system. The only reason he was able to stand was because the vent he fell down through was vertical. Seven got down on his hands and began to crawl. He wandered through the vent for a while and then found an exit. He stumbled through and observed the room. There was just more luggage and quite a few piles of wax. There was a door that led to another room, but it was sealed shut with wax. Seven tried to pick it off with his pipe, but it wouldn't budge. It was too solid. As he thought about another way to remove the wax, he got an idea. He turned to his companion and told the idea. "Do you think you can melt this?" he asked. "Fire makes wax melt, maybe you can shoot enough fire at the wax to make it melt off. Or at least make it easier to pick off." The Grimchild nodded and flew right up to the door. It started spitting out fireballs at the door, specifically at the piles of wax. It repetitively spit out its fire and soon, the wax started to drip. Seven thought that he could help his friend and started removing the wax with his pipe. Soon, most of the wax was gone and the door creaked open. Seven looked at the door as it slowly opened and closed. Why was it doing that? Suddenly, he noticed everything was rocking back and forth, back and forth. Were they on some kind of boat? Seven shuddered at the thought. Due to the last experience in water, he had been afraid to enter any large pool of liquid. Now in a bit of a frantic rush, Seven pushed the door open and proceeded through. He arrived in a shaft with a door on the other side. There was something above that looked like it could move a rope. Perhaps that could help. Seven walked back into the other room and looked around for a rope or something that could serve as one. The Grimchild chirped, drawing his attention, and he came to a delight, seeing his friend had already found a rope to use. The Grimchild carried the rope to the other room and wove it into the contraption above. Seven grabbed onto the rope and the Grimchild pulled it in the direction of the door. Seven managed to land safely and he and the Grimchild pushed open the door. He walked into the room it led to and was greeted by scurrying gnomes. But they weren't running for him, they were running for something else. Seven heard the sound of a rope moving and his fear spiked. Thinking quick, he found an old pile of suitcases and hid behind them. He watched as the wax creature came into the room and started picking up suitcases and packages. He placed them on racks and shelves, sorting them all up. Seven's heart suddenly skipped a beat. They were hiding behind suitcases. The bellman would find them in a matter of minutes. He looked around the room in a panic, desperately searching for a way to escape. He saw more gnomes scurry away from the man and into a large hole in the wall. Upon further examination, he noticed the girl was there as well, beckoning him to follow through the hole. He made a mad dash for the hole and slid into it, not wanting to be caught. The Grimchild followed, sharing his feelings of panic. Both of them continued following the gnomes, running down a narrow, dark hallway in the wall. They arrived in another hallway, with its walls lined with luggage. Near the beginning of the room was an elevator, and near the end was another door. The gnomes ran to the door in a hurry. Before Seven could figure out why, the elevator dinged. Seven gulped and started racing down to the end of the hallway with the gnomes. The Grimchild, however, had other plans. It flew along with its bearer, but it shot out fireballs as it moved. The wax bellman noticed his body melting and started chasing after the source. As for Seven, he kept on running, sliding and jumping over suitcases and luggage that fell down. He was starting to lose the gnomes, but he kept running, aware of the path he was taking. A clump of wax was flung in front of him, almost crushing him. The bellman was fighting back. Seven made sure to avoid every clump of wax thrown at him and the falling luggage from the shelves. He finally reached the door and slammed into it, forcing it open. He ran along a metal bridge, which from what he could tell, was over a large furnace. An idea struck him like a lightning bolt. Destroy the bellman's rope. He shouted to the Grimchild. It heard the request of its bearer and directed its attention to the rope moving the bellman. Seven continued running, hoping that there was enough time for his plan to work. He was approaching the end of the bridge with nowhere left to go. He reached the end and turned around to face the melting face of the wax bellman. He reached his arms out to Seven, trying to grab him, when suddenly, there was a snap. The Grimchild had succeeded in burning the rope. The bellman fell from the bridge and into the furnace below. Seven took a deep breath. It's over. He thought. A contraption started moving behind him, carrying crates up to a room. Seven looked up at them and saw the glitched girl walk away into the room above. Seven was greatly curious about who this girl was and why she was helping him, so he got in a crate and rode it up into the room. He followed a stray gnome into another room and found a large fireplace, warming several gnomes. But something was off. Their shadows, they didn't align with them. They looked completely different, like actual children's shadows. Seven was puzzled out of his mind when he saw the girl again, standing in front of him, as if she was waiting for him to come closer. Seven walked up to her and began to talk. Who are you?" he asked. Nothing was said in response. "Well, thanks for helping me earlier," Seven continued. "Why are you helping me?" "Nothing." What's your name?" Upon asking that, the area around him began to change. It started glitching as more glitch children appeared around him. He looked back at the girl. She had changed. Her face was still glitched, but she was wearing a yellow raincoat and she had brown braided hair. She grabbed Seven's shoulders, pulling herself closer. "Please help us," she said in a desperate voice. "You're the only one who can." What do you mean?" Seven asked. "Please," she said. "Please, please, please. Please." The H2CH19. Troopmaster Grimm. Seven's eyes burst open. He threw his body up, gasping for breath. What was that? What just happened? Seven closed his eyes and tried to process what occurred with the bellman. The girl, the gnomes, the glitch children, he remembered it all. He remembered her screaming for his help, begging him to save them. What did that mean? But there was something else that was troubling him. The girl's voice, it sounded familiar. Did he know her? The more he thought about it, the more it troubled his mind. A cry from the Grimchild woke him from his confusion. He remembered where he was and what happened. He was back in the room where the Grimchild lit the candle and his nail was on the ground beside him. He looked back at the candle and noticed it had completely melted. Just like with the barber. He thought. He picked up his nail, but it felt different in his hands. It didn't feel the same as before, as if he wasn't used to using it. Seven shrugged it off and walked out of the room. He pulled out his compass and found a stag station was nearby. When he noticed that there were no flames on the map, he remembered the task. He had to get the Grimchild back to the Grimm troop. He walked to the stag station and told the stag to go to Dirtmouth. He smiled to himself as he rode. It had been a while since he had been to Dirtmouth. It had been a while before he saw the Grimm troop. A bit of excitement stirred around in him as the stag trotted off to Dirtmouth. The stag came to a stop, having arrived at the destination. Seven hopped off and rode the short elevator to the main town. Dirtmouth hadn't changed a bit since he left. He walked towards the bench in the town center and was greeted by the face of Elderbug. "Ah. You've come back," he said. "Many thought that you had perished for sure down in the caverns below." Elderbug turned to his flower and started to gaze at its petals in a deep trance. "Something wrong?" Seven asked. "You really remind me of my little friend," he replied. "They were so young and strong. They took extended trips down that well there and every time I would wonder if they would fall, but they came back to the town every time." He continued to look at the flower, sadness growing in his eyes. "They haven't come back yet, but I know they will. Someday," he said. "Oh, I'm sorry," Seven said. Even the Grimchild showed remorse for the Elderbug. Seven would have stayed a while longer, but the music from the red tents outside reminded him why he came here. He looked at the Grimchild, who looked back at him, ready to grow stronger. Seven smiled and entered the main tent. He walked through the long hallway of the tent and met with Brum, still playing his accordion. "Very good. The child burns with flame," he said. "Master is waiting for you. MRMM." Seven nodded and proceeded to the center room of the tent. With a burst of red flames, Grimm appeared before him. He turned his head and looked at the Grimchild, then at Seven. "Wonderful. Wonderful. My kin arrive and the time has come," he said. He opened up his cloak and the Grimchild flew into it by pure instinct. There was a flash of red flames as Grimm closed his cloak around the Grimchild and returned to his normal stance. "This searing fire," he said. "It carries well the ritual's promise." He turned his attention back to Seven and snapped his fingers. Lanterns all around the room lit up with a scarlet fire, revealing an audience of Grimkin eagerly watching Seven and Grimm. "Dance with me, my friend," Grimm said, his scarlet eyes glowing with fire. "The crowd awaits. Show them you are worthy of a starring role." Seven knew exactly what he meant when he said dance. He drew his nail and readied himself. Grimm bowed, then vanished in a flash of scarlet flame. He appeared behind Seven and opened his cloak. 3 flaming bats flew out from inside, all aimed at Seven. Using the dash/, Seven managed to cross over the bats and strike Grimm at the same time. As Grimm vanished again, Seven stayed astute, looking for where he would appear next. To his shock, Grimm appeared above him, with his cloak wrapped around him, pointed like a knife. He flew toward Seven and landed on the ground. Seven backed away from Grimm, but once he landed, he lunged at him, striking him with his cloak. The cloak felt like a flexible knife, shifting and changing, with the intention to hurt. Seven regained his composure and kept his eye out for Grimm. He appeared in front of him and swiped at him with his cloak. Seven fought back with his own weapon, managing to strike Grimm a few times. As he was about to swing again, Grimm leapt into the air and vanished as flames rained down from above. He then appeared in the center of the stage, sticking his cloak into the ground. Seven charged up the great slash and struck Grimm with a powerful blow. He expected his attack to be completely successful, but he didn't know that Grimm was fighting back. Spikes suddenly sprung out from the floor all around the stage. One of them struck Seven while he was unaware. As Grimm vanished again, Seven began charging his energy. He figured that was the best thing to do while Grimm's attacks remained unpredictable. He appeared in the air again, surging toward Seven. He was quick to jump in order to evade Grimm's surge, and once he landed, Seven used the dash/, to get over him. He continued to focus, making sure he could perform a nail art at any time. Grimm appeared on the floor and swung at Seven with his cloak. Luckily, Seven landed a great slash on Grimm, greatly damaging him. Grimm appeared in the stage's center again, impaling the ground with his cloak. Seven managed to hit him with another great slash while he was in the room's center. Then, he quickly evaded the giant spikes that burst out of the ground. Grimm unleashed more of his firebats, but his attacks were becoming predictable. Seven allowed a confident smile to spread across his face. "You want to dance, Troop Master?" he asked, readying himself for Grimm's next move. "Then let's dance together in fire." PH2CH20. Dancing in Flame. Grimm revealed himself to Seven, and the two of them clashed with their weapons. Seven ducked and leapt to avoid the swings of Grimm's deadly cloak. As Seven attacked, Grimm too did his best to avoid, all while maintaining his dance style of combat. Grimm vanished again and launched himself from the air at Seven. Luckily, Seven was ready for that attack and jumped over Grimm and struck him with a dash/. As the fight continued, Grimm allowed a smile across his face. "Now let the real dance begin," he yelled. Grimm vanished and appeared in the air at the center of the stage. Seven was ready for Grimm to shoot himself down, but his cloak turned into something else. It puffed up, growing short spikes all around, and a barrage of fireballs scattered across the stage in all directions. Seven moved around in a sudden panic, trying to avoid the fireballs. Despite his efforts, he found himself getting struck by 3 fireballs. As he tried to avoid the fire, the crowd of Grimkin clapped and cheered for the bearer and their troop master. Grimm vanished again, and he launched his firebats at Seven, giving him no rest. Seven quickly ran towards Grimm, leapt over the first bat, and used the dash/. But suddenly, Grimm disappeared in a puff of flame. Seven turned around to see Grimm behind him, flinging a firebat towards him. The surprise caught Seven off guard, and the firebat slammed into his chest. Grimm appeared behind him, but before he could attack, Seven struck him with a great slash. Grimm suddenly burst into multiple Grimchild-like figures, one of them keeping his scarlet eyes. Seven swung at the scarlet-eyed Grimchild, striking it twice before they all regrouped to form Grimm. The crowd applauded the excellent performance of Seven and Grimm as the dance continued. The two of them continued to swipe at each other, counting their opponent's every move. Grimm leapt into the air again, raining down flames as he disappeared yet again. Seven kept his eyes out and saw a puff of red flames as Grimm revealed himself. He ran towards him, ready to strike. But before he could land a hit, Grimm scurried away on four legs, letting a part of his nightmarish form show. He attacked Seven with his firebats, but Seven easily countered with a dash slash. Grimm appeared in the stage's center, once again puffing up his cloak. The crowd cheered and applauded, while Seven managed to dodge most of the fireballs Grimm shot out. As they kept fighting, Seven realized why Grimm called this battle a dance. The way he used the same attack and the way Seven used the same techniques to dodge, it was like a dance. Now knowing the tactics, Seven continued to dance with the troop master, and even the flames around seemed to be dancing around them as they fought. No matter how many times Seven was struck with the scarlet fire, he always kept fighting. All for the Grimchild. All for his friend. The dance reached its climax as Grimm suddenly screamed out after Seven struck him one final time. Flames erupted from his body and cloak as he vanished into flames. As Seven thought it was over, Grimm reappeared in the stage's center and bowed to Seven. Seven bowed back, and the crowd cheered and clapped louder than ever before. Grimm stood back up in his usual pose, awaiting Seven's approach. Before Seven reached Grimm, he heard his voice in his head as familiar dream catcher particles swirled around him. Masterful. Even a broken dream can stand its own against me. Grimm's voice said. A worthy replacement for you, little friend. And a perfect tool to prolong the heart of Grimm. The particles faded, and Seven was left once again with questions. Who was the little friend Grimm mentioned? Was it the Grimchild? No, it couldn't be. Grimm said replacement. Could he mean the previous bearer of the Grimchild? And most importantly, what did Grimm mean when he called him a broken dream? He forced himself out of his questions and approached Grimm. Bravo, my friend, he said. Hear how the crowd adores you. They thought they'd never see such a show so soon after the last. Grimm paused and snapped his fingers. A swirl of flames gathered before Seven, and the Grimchild appeared in front of him. Seven smiled at the return of his friend, but was soon impressed with their change. The Grimchild's shell was now red like Grimm's, and 6 tentacles were keeping it up in the air. The Grimchild flew around Seven, happily chirping for its bearer. Seven smiled, along with Grimm. Look here. How our child has grown, nourished and strengthened by the heat of our passionate dance. He said, smiling. G looked down at the two of them and gave a quick nod of respect. The two of you will feature in many tragedies and triumphs together, I'm sure. Grimm turned back and faced the crowd of Grimkin. And so our great ritual nears its end. Would you continue to harvest the flame, even though now you surely see the path it illuminates for us? He asked Seven, knowing he heard his inner thoughts. He looked down at the dream. He did not yet know who he was, and his head was bustling with question after question. But in time, he would learn of his strength and use his power to its fullest. He smiled at Seven and spoke. Our scarlet eyes will watch you keenly, friend. And with that, the lanterns above went out, cloaking the crowd in darkness. Grimm vanished in a puff of flames, but not before leaving Seven with some final words. Go out into the darkness, he said. Harvest the last lingering embers of this kingdom. Then return to me and we will complete our dance. His voice silenced, leaving only Seven and the Grimchild left in the stage. Seven looked at his friend, and with a shared feeling of determination, they headed out of the tent. But as they walked, Seven noticed the silence. Before he exited, he realized. Brum wasn't there. I wait, you young one. The child's memories must be restored. PH2CH21. Secrets of the Child. Seven stepped out of the tent and made his way to the bench in Dirtmouth. He sat down and took a much-needed rest. After his fight with Grimm, his body and mind were exhausted. He once again had more questions than answers. The glitched children and girl, why Brum was missing, how he could hear secret conversations and enter different places upon the touch of a finger, and most importantly, all that talk about him being a dream. All those questions were running through Seven's head. He needed answers, but how could he get them? He figured the best thing to do now was to ask around town. He could probably get some answers or leads from the townsfolk. Maybe Sly could answer some questions. He did seem like he knew most of the things that happened in this place. He walked into Sly's shop but found out he wasn't there. In his place was an open door that led to the basement. Seven climbed down and saw candles lighting a room in the distance. He walked towards them and found Sly sitting in front of the biggest nail Seven had ever seen. So there is one more to join our group, Sly said. He stood up and looked at Seven. Forgive me, but I have nothing to give you. I already gave away the last charm to the one I thought would be the last to join us. But as the great nail sage I must give something to those that have proven their worth. Tell me, what do you seek, young one? Sly asked. All I want are answers, Seven replied. I'm so confused, I don't even know who I am. Well, I can see why you have that confusion. You're acting like someone else, Sly said. What? The way you fight, the child beside you, it's all too much like the night, Sly explained. You need to stop acting like them and act like you. What? But I don't even know who the knight is. 7 expressed. Then maybe there is something I can give you. Sly turned to a large pile and pulled out a small map. This map shows the location of all nailmasters in Helenist. Since I gave them the title, you should be able to find them with this, he said, handing the map to 7. Thank you. Thank you so much. 7 said. Rather than thank me, why not go and continue with your quest? You still have to take care of the child, right? Sly asked. Oh, yes. Once again, thank you. 7 yelled as he ran to the exit. He ran back to the bench and pulled out his compass. As excited as he was to finally find some answers, he wanted to help the Grimchild first. He looked at the compass to find the flames, but noticed something odd. There were only 2 flames on the map. Weren't there supposed to be 3? As he looked, he found something else. One of the flames was very close to a mark on Sly's map. He pulled out the map and looked at it. He identified the 3 places he'd already visited and found the 4th marker in a place called Deepnest on the map. The 4th marker had to be the night. And it was close to a flame as well. Although 7 was confused about why there were only 2 flames, he could figure that out later. Now, he needed to find answers. He looked at the map and found a stag station very close by. He quickly got to the stag, with the Grimchild following him, and they rode off to the distant village, as it said on the destination. 7 could barely contain himself as they rode the stag. He could practically jump out of his seat. The stag arrived at the station, and 7 hopped off. The Grimchild felt the excitement of its bearer and shared it. They both exited the station, ready to find some answers. 7 quickly stopped as he realized the area below him. There were houses, woven in silk, with a large pit below. 7 carefully moved from surface to surface, trying to reach the houses. The Grimchild flew over to one house and chirped for 7's attention. The house had a red light inside, so 7 assumed a flame was in there. He figured getting the flame first wouldn't be so bad. But, if there was a flame in there, how would he fight the Grimkin? Shouldn't the flame be out in the open so the Grimkin could fight him? He shrugged the question off and entered the house with the Grimchild. Once he entered, he was shocked. There wasn't a Grimkin in the room. It was Brum. What was he doing here? So, we meet again. Here, at the edge of the world, Brum said. The ritual repeats itself, all to prolong the heart of Grimm, he said, looking at the Grimchild. Would you believe me if I said that this ritual has happened before? In this very kingdom? He said, looking at 7. What? What are you talking about? 7 asked. Brum took a deep breath. Not long ago, the night arrived at the lantern. Using the dream nail, it lit our scarlet fire, leading us to this destroyed kingdom. Our ritual took place, and the night gathered the flame, feeding the child. It seemed that it would complete the ritual, but something intervened. What? What intervened? 7 asked. The signal tower, Brum explained. It arrived in our world and disturbed the events of it. Our kin scattered out again, the child lost its flame, and the knight's place in the ritual was removed. The tower changed this world to a point beyond repair, leaving us with no other option but to start our ritual from scratch. Brum looked back at the Grimchild. Well, take the flame I have harvested, it is what you came here for after all, he said. He waved the torch and the Grimchild swallowed up the flame. Brum continued to look at the Grimchild as it flew around 7. The child, he said. The child must remember. It must remember the time before, the night and the ritual. A false life is no life. It must remember the correct ritual. With that, Brum vanished, leaving 7 and the Grimchild with the path that laid ahead. PH2CH22. Memories restored. Both 7 and the Grimchild were left completely silent. Neither one of them could completely process what Brum just said. When 7 did process it, he still had no idea what to do. The Grimchild needed to remember what happened before, but how could he help them remember something that he had no clue about? 7 thought and thought, then remembered something else that Brum said. Brum mentioned the night. That was the whole reason 7 came here, and apparently the Grimchild needed to remember the night. 7 turned to the Grimchild to tell them, but they were still floating in place. The Grimchild couldn't think straight. Something was missing. It didn't know what, but it knew something didn't make sense. The ritual, the dance, it had all happened before, but 7 wasn't there. If 7 wasn't its bearer, then who was? Why couldn't it remember? Suddenly, the Grimchild remembered events throughout this ritual. Mado's previous pupil, Shio's painting, Sly's last nailmaster, Elderbug's lost friend the delicate flower. The memories flooded the Grimchild's mind and it was taken back to the first time it opened its eyes. It remembered the first face it saw. A white shell with 2 black eye holes and 2 horns with jagged points at the end. That face was the face of its first bearer. The face of the night. The Grimchild instantly remembered the night and started frantically flying around in shock and panic. Then it remembered the map. It remembered the charm Sly had given the night. The map could track the charm. If they still had the charm then they were here. The Grimchild zoomed out of the house and looked around for any signs of the night. It heard Seven calling for them, but they couldn't listen. A larger house of silk called to the Grimchild and it zoomed inside. It found the scattered cloaks and shells. It remembered the trick. The knight sat down on the bench and was bound by tight strings. As it was being knocked out, the Grimchild remembered that it tried to help its bearer break free from the string, but then an orange light consumed them. All they could remember next was static. What happened? What happened next? The Grimchild flew up into the roof and into the beast's den. It flew around in the tunnels, trying to find any clues to the fate of its first bearer. As it flew, it noticed a faint light shining through small cracks in the wall. It broke the wall with its fireballs, revealing a hidden treasure stash. Inside was everything that had belonged to the knight. The Lumafly lantern, the spare relics, the tram pass, and all 38 charms. All here, where no one would have looked. But if the knight's stuff was here, then where was the knight? The Grimchild continued to fly all around, avoiding all enemy bugs it ran into. After a long panicked search, it found a room with broken strands of spider silk. Around them were several dreamcatcher particles. The Grimchild remembered how the knight used the dream nail to interact with the particles. Maybe it could do the same. The Grimchild took a deep breath and tried focusing all of its power into a fireball. It remembered how it used its fire to enter the dream realm with the bellman and focused even more. It spit out the fireball at the particles and it exploded as the particles spread out. The Grimchild opened its eyes after the particles faded and saw a slightly faded image. It was the knight. It was tied up in silk as the creatures plundered it for anything they deemed useful. When they left, the Grimchild just stared at the image in front. It looked at its first bearer, remembering them clearly. They looked so real and vivid. The Grimchild wanted to fly around the night like it used to, but it was just a dream. Suddenly, as it watched, something happened. A boy wearing a paper bag over his head walked into the room and after looking at the knight for a while, started breaking the strings holding the knight in place. The knight fell to the ground and the Grimchild watched as the two figures exchanged hollow gazes. The dream particles faded, along with the image. Suddenly the Grimchild remembered. Where was its current bearer? It had left them without knowing what could have happened. The Grimchild flew out of the den and cried out for Seven. Seven ran out of the room chasing after the Grimchild. He called to his friend, but it wouldn't listen. It was too wrapped up in something else. It flew into a larger room and Seven chased after it. But as he ran, he tripped and fell down the deep dark cavern. He hit the black waters below and sunk down as his mind drifted off into a dream. He opened his eyes and saw the braided raincoat girl standing in front of him once again. "Please, you're the only one who can hear us," she begged. "You need to help us." What? But, I don't even know how. I don't even know what to do." Seven yelled. From the darkness surrounding them, an old creaky laugh rang out. The girl's face became horrified. "Oh no," she said. "She's coming." "What? Who?" Seven asked. The girl grabbed him by the shoulders and pulled him closer. "Enter the jaws, restore the void, halt the static, feed the hunger, and mend the friendship that was broken. The spider will lead the way," she said, her voice shaking. "Well, what does that even mean?" Seven yelled, lost in confusion. The laugh echoed again, this time much closer. "She's here," the girl said before disappearing into the dark. As the laugh echoed again, Seven looked behind him and saw a deformed old lady swimming towards him. "Come here, my dream," she said, reaching her bony hands towards him. Seven tried to run, but it felt like he was in thick tar all over him. As he braced himself for the coming terror, he felt several strings pull him out of the tar. He opened his eyes and found himself laying on the ground in front of the stag station, with the Grimchild looking right into his eyes. He quickly gasped for breath as the shock from the dream reached him and he sat up, looking all around. The Grimchild calmed him down and he looked at his friend. "Thanks for saving me," he said. The Grimchild titled its head in confusion. "Didn't you pull me out of that dream?" Seven asked. "I felt strings pulling me out. Wasn't that you?" The Grimchild shook its head. "But if you didn't, then who did?" In the distance, a horned figure wearing a burgundy-red cloak leapt away, swinging with a string of spider silk from her needle. PH2CH23. Lost in confusion. Seven's short moment of confusion ended as he remembered what the girl said in his dream. His confusion spiraled around, but then stopped. The confusion turned into a grim feeling that Seven had never felt before. The feeling of not knowing what to do emerged inside of him and sent him into deep conflict within himself. He stood up and without saying a word, he walked over to the stag and pointed to Dirtmouth. He rode back and once he arrived, he wandered outside of town. The comments of the citizens failed to reach his ears as he walked further and further away. Eventually, he stopped walking and looked up at the entrance to the King's Pass. He climbed up the ledge as if it was instinct leading him somewhere. As he walked through the tunnels, the Grimchild noticed the state of its bear and tried to cheer him up. But Seven said no response as he continued walking. The Grimchild began to think of a reason why its bear was so distant, but it couldn't think of anything logical. Seven reached the cliffside that lead to the upper parts of the Howling Cliffs and let instinct take over again. He scaled the cliffside and climbed up to the top of the Howling Cliffs. Once he was up there, he just wandered. He didn't know what to do, he didn't know where to go, so he just wandered. He wandered across the cliffs mindlessly, lost in his confusion. It had built up so much that nothing made sense in Seven's mind now. As he wandered, he arrived in the cave with the nightmare lantern. He didn't notice anything in the room until he bumped into something. He came back to his senses and saw Brum standing in front of the nightmare lantern, staring at it. "Brum?" Seven asked. "What are you doing here?" Brum said nothing for a while and kept staring at the lantern. Finally, without turning to Seven, he spoke. "The ritual plays itself out once more. We are like the notes in an old song," he said. "Endless, repeating songs of sacrifice, of servitude. For the ritual. For the troop. For the master. Even the Grimchild was born into invisible chains. So we serve thus it has ever been," he continued. "A song that never ends is no song at all." He then paused, continuing to stare at the lantern. "Those were the words I said to the previous bearer of the child during the previous ritual," he said. "For so long, we have been repeating the song, and for so long have I wanted to silence it. But now times are different." "What do you mean?" Seven asked. "Something has clung to the flames of our song," Brum replied. "A large cluster of lost souls now cling to our song for life. So that they may live long enough to finish their task." Brum paused. "Alas, in their current state, their task cannot be done. They need someone who already exists in physical form to help them. But the people cannot hear their cries. Only someone who exists between a state of life and death with a strong connection to our flames can hear their desperate calls for help." Brum finally turned and looked down at Seven. "That someone is you," he said. Seven lunged back in shock as Brum turned back to the lantern. "If their task is left incomplete, then a monster with an unending hunger will ravage the lands, destroying everything in sight, all to satisfy itself," he said. "That is why I no longer desire to silence our song. Master hears the voices, but he chooses to ignore them. Because of this, he cannot think straight and can only repeat things that he has said before. I, however, am not affected by this." Brum turned to Seven once more. "So I took it upon myself to heed the voices' warnings and convey their message to the one who can hear them," he explained. "The child is your connection to the flame, but if it doesn't know who it is, then that connection can cease to exist and the voices will not reach the one who can hear them. That is why the child had to remember." Brum turned back to the lantern one last time. "I've said all I know. What happens next is yours to decide," he said. But that, Seven's immense feeling of confusion returned and he walked out of the cave. He then wandered to the only place he could remember. The place where he woke up. The place where everything began. He came to the area and looked over the cliffs. Then, he collapsed to the ground, sobbing his eyes out. The Grimchild was alarmed by his sudden sorrow and tried to cheer him up. In Seven's somber state, he finally spoke. "I don't know what to do," he mumbled meekly. "I don't know what's going on, I don't know what everyone wants me to do, I don't know how to do anything, I don't know why it has to be me to do this," he said as his tears rolled down his face. "I don't even know who I am anymore," he meekly said, still crying. "I don't know if I'm alive or dead, if I'm a kid or a dream, if I'm even real or not, I don't know anything anymore." He finally yelled. As he yelled, his body shook and his compass fell out. It then started to fall down the cliffside. The Grimchild panicked and flew to the compass, catching it in its jaws. Once it did, the compass activated and the Grimchild saw something peculiar. It flew over to Seven and tried to get his attention by making loud noises. "What is it now?" Seven asked, looking up. His eyes looked at the compass map and he stopped crying for a moment. He looked closely at the map and saw two more flames had appeared. Not only that, but they were moving closer to the cliffs. There was no area around them, they were just moving. Suddenly, a loud horn rang out, catching his attention. He looked in the direction of the noise and felt something calling to him. He scaled down the cliff, trying to get a better look through the fog of the cliffs. As he neared the end, he was able to make out an ocean at the edge of the cliffs. Was there always an ocean there? He thought to himself. He looked closer and saw a horde of large bugs and people walking across a bridge to a floating dome in the ocean. As Seven looked closer, he felt like he had seen that structure before. It was very clear in his mind, but he didn't know what it was. And yet, it was so familiar to him. He inched a little too close to the edge and slipped off the cliff, falling into the large crowd of people and bugs. They all looked at him and then screamed out. Seven tried to run away but was caught in the grasp of one of the figures and knocked unconscious as he was loaded onto the structure in the water. BH2CH24. Back where it began. Seven's eyes fluttered open but saw nothing but darkness. He laid motionless, his body drained of its mobility. He felt himself rock back and forth as he was being carried by something. Or rather, someone. His eyes closed, not having enough energy to keep him awake. He fell asleep and was put onto a rough bed. When he finally woke up, his movement was restored and his eyes had adjusted. He sat up on the bed and looked around the room. Suddenly, he remembered what happened. He quickly looked all over himself and found out that all his stuff was missing. His nail, his compass, everything was gone. He looked up and tried to find the Grimchild, but it wasn't anywhere to be seen. "Hey!" he yelled. "Grimchild. Where are you?" He yelled out into the darkness for his friend, hoping that they would respond. But there was nothing. No response. No answer. As Seven looked around in the darkness, he recognized the area he was in. He remembered it all too well. He inched himself against the wall in fear. "No. No, no, no," he stuttered. "Not here. Not now. Not alone," he yelled. Out of all the places he had to end up, he had to be at the worst place imaginable for him. The source of his nightmares, the source of his troubles. The maw. He cowered in fear, then smacked himself back to reality. He had to find a way out. He had to find some way to escape. He leapt off the bed he was on and scurried around the room like a little gnome. He searched all around, remembering the path he took before. He had come so close last time, maybe this time he could escape. He navigated through the halls and past the security eye. He came to the wall with a rope of tied sheets leading out. Just like he remembered. He climbed up the rope and out of the room. As he landed, all he could do was stare at the metal structure of the maw. It was like he remembered, but there was a sickly air that filled the place. As Seven proceeded, he noticed small orange-eyed bugs crawling the floor. As he got close, they started crawling towards him with their mouths bared. Seven was prepared to fight, but he soon realized something. He didn't have his nail. Defenseless, he ran as fast as he could, away from the bugs. He didn't know where he was going, he just needed to escape. Suddenly, he tripped and fell down a long pipe. He splashed into dark, murky water once he reached the end. He remembered what happened last time he was in water and started swimming as fast as he could to the ledge. He pulled himself out and shuddered as he looked back at the water. He remembered something was in there. He didn't know what, but he knew it wasn't good. He continued walking as he pushed the thought away and arrived in a dark room. At least, Seven remembered it being a dark room. Instead, it was lit up. But not with a flashlight like last time. This time, there were several orange gooey bubbles and vines swarming the place. And all of them were emitting a strange orange light. As Seven continued, he crossed through areas he remembered being dangerous, but there was surprisingly nothing. While this would normally calm someone, knowing there wasn't danger nearby, it made Seven even more cautious, with the knowledge that something bigger and more dangerous was at the maw. He continued walking through the places he had been before, all changed by the orange goo. As he progressed, he had to enter another pool of water. He spotted a ledge on the other side, took a deep breath, then drove into the water, swimming as fast as possible. Unfortunately, his suspicion was true. He wasn't alone in the water. As he swam, something started swimming after him, deep below the water. Seven heard the sound of their bubbles and started panicking as he trudged through the water. He managed to reach the exit in time and he pulled himself out. He didn't even look back at the water. He just ran. He paid no attention to his surroundings as he ran. He just ran by instinct. His body knew exactly what to do and where to go, but his mind paid no attention. Only when he stumbled into water again did he regain his senses. He quickly got out and looked at the pool before him. It was filled with furniture and trash. Just like that one. He gulped and dove into the water again. As he swam, the thing returned. But it was swimming faster. Suddenly, Seven heard the creature's voice ring out from the depths. "Come here, my child," it said. "Granny made a treat for you." Seven ignored the voice and swam to the nearest piece of furniture to climb on. He pulled himself up onto it and took a series of deep breaths. As he did, the creature below continued to speak. "You're wondering how old Granny's alive, aren't you?" she asked. "Well, after I was painfully electrocuted, I saw a light. And the light brought me back. It brought this whole place back to life and even improved it." The granny chuckled. "And now," she said, reaching her old bony hand up to Seven. "I am no longer afraid of leaving the water." The granny pulled herself up to Seven, causing him to panic and dive into the water. As he swam, the granny taunted him as she swam after him. "For so long I have dragged children down to these depths to feast on their dreams," she said. "But I never expected to drag an actual dream down here." "What dream?" Seven yelled, letting his confusion spill out. The granny stopped chasing him and reached her head out of the water. "You don't remember, child?" she asked. "Well, let me remind you." She reached out her hand and grabbed Seven, pulling him into the water. As Seven struggled to break free, he saw a memory appear in the waters below him. He was walking through a series of corridors while something chased him down. Suddenly, as he reached an opening, a lady wearing a mask approached him, raising him into the air with her powers. As his body crumbled apart, he was enveloped in shadow. When he woke up, he was nothing but a gnome. Another memory played and showed a gnome standing in a large room with nothing but a sausage in front of it. As it stared down at the sausage, a girl wearing a yellow raincoat walked into the room, clutching her stomach in pain. The gnome noticed the girl and picked up the sausage, offering it to her. The girl inched towards the sausage, her mouth watering. But as she approached the gnome, she intentionally missed the sausage and dug her teeth into the gnome, eating it up. Seven remembered. That gnome was him. That was the girl he tried to help. "I really am dead," he thought to himself. But the memory didn't end. After the girl left, a glowing moth, surrounded by dream catcher particles, descended toward Seven's dead body. "Your time isn't up yet," the moth said. Seven's body glowed as dream catcher particles surrounded him and his body began to shift. His body was reverted back to his normal appearance and he breathed in. The moth picked up Seven and sent his body through the dream realm. The moth then laid his body in the howling cliffs. Then, the moth rose into the sky with a flash of white light. The memory faded and Seven made his way back to the surface. As he gasped for air, the granny rose yet again. "Now do you remember?" she asked. "Such a shame. You are the only one who can hear the children's voices. And now, they shall watch as you fail them." The granny grabbed Seven again and pulled him deeper into the water, holding him down. He tried to break free, but her grip was too strong. As he pulled deeper and deeper, he saw the figures of the children appear all around him. "Don't give up yet. Keep trying," they pleaded. "Please. We need you." As Seven tried to break free, he saw another image appear above him. It was a glitched boy, wearing a bag over his head. He reached his hand out to Seven and moved closer to him. Seven managed to get his left arm free and reached for the boy's hand. "Please help me," he yelled as the granny pulled him deeper. Finally, their hands touched and Seven suddenly felt a burst of static around him. It was like he was in a TV. The static grew and grew until it burst out of Seven, violently electrocuting the water around him. The granny shrieked out in pain and then just like that, she sunk into the water, lifeless. Seven smiled, but he was drained of his energy and couldn't swim. His eyes closed and his breath drained from his body as he sunk deeper into the depths. Suddenly, he woke up. He coughed up water and felt his surroundings. He was lying down on a solid surface with nothing else around. His eyes struggled open and he looked into a pair of familiar scarlet eyes. Suddenly, he was wrapped up in the Grimchild's tentacles, squeezing him with a hug. Seven recognized his friend and hugged back as best he could. Tears fell from his eyes as he was reunited with his best friend. "Thank goodness you're here," he muttered. "But how? How'd you find me?" "I helped them," a strong female voice said from behind. Seven broke the hug and saw a figure with a red cloak, a white shell with 2 horns, and a needle by her side. You're the child's bearer, correct?" she asked. "Yeah, my name is Seven," he replied. "What's yours?" "I am Hornet, guardian of Helenist and daughter of Queen Hera of Deepnest," she replied. "Deepnest?" Seven asked. Then he remembered something. The spider will lead the way, he thought. "Come on. We have no time to waste," Hornet said. Seven nodded and stood up. He didn't know much about Hornet or why she was helping him, but he knew 2 things. He had the Grimchild by his side and he knew who he was. He and Hornet marched off, ready for what they would face next. The runaway child, revived into a dream. Traveling to complete his task by any means. The newborn child, born into chains. Wandering and searching. Feasting on flames. And together, you must stay strong. Together, you'll make it along. Do not fear, for you are prepared. We'll create little dreams from these hollow nightmares. Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.